It was early March in the 53rd year of Deshwan. The heavy snow that had buried the capital of Great Wu all winter was finally melting, but the wind was still razor-sharp. I stood in a secluded side courtyard of the Jindong Marquis estate, dressed in nothing but thin clothes, sweat pouring off my body. I didn't stop. I swung my blade again and again. My face was flushed red, and my blood was surging like a tide. I gripped the hilt of my long blade. Suddenly, the text changed. Basic blade technique has reached perfection. A grin spread across my face. My blood began to boil violently, and strands of red energy actually seeped out of my skin. Behind me, the phantom of a crimson sun materialized. It looked like the first sunrise of creation, piercing through the chaotic darkness with blinding heat. My body shook. I felt like I was made of molten lava. The power reached a breaking point, and I swung the blade one last time. For a split second, the courtyard transformed from freezing winter to high summer. A crisp crack echoed inside my chest. It felt like an invisible shackle had snapped. The boiling energy found its center and surged through my veins like a river rushing to the sea. My momentum hit its peak. The 8th grade essence refining realm was complete. I opened my eyes, but the vision vanished as quickly as it appeared. I had been in this world for 2 months. Finally, I had reached the 8th grade, and nobody even knew. 2 months ago, I realized I had logged into a mysterious game world way ahead of schedule. In my past life, this game appeared out of nowhere on Earth. Only a few lucky people were chosen to enter this hyper-realistic world. Back then, I entered during the public beta, which started during the reign of the Empress. But right now, it was the era of Emperor 1. I was 11 years early. I knew what was coming. In 5 years, the two dragons' succession struggle would turn bloody. He would go mad with bloodlust, but he wouldn't be the winner. She would become the first empress of Great Wu, starting a glorious but iron-fisted era. I looked down at my palm. A faint tattoo of an imperial jade seal was etched into my skin. Only I could see it. Right now, I needed strength. Emperor Wen's reign was a mess of corruption and banditry. The country was fractured. To others, it was chaos. To me, it was an opportunity. Once the Empress took the throne and crushed the 8 Kings' rebellion, the country would be unified and strictly controlled. Opportunities for a quick rise would vanish. I had to build my power now, before this spiritual chi recovery version of the game started and the world merged with the heavens. I grabbed a towel and started wiping the sweat from my skin. My starting position wasn't bad. I was born into the Jindong Marquis estate. 600 years ago, during a massive rebellion, the first Marquis, Xia Xuanjin, rose from a common soldier to a legendary general. When the imperial armies were failing, Xia Xuanjin led 5,000 cavalry on a 10,000-mile sprint to the capital. He pierced the enemy's heart like a dagger and ended the war. But there were rumors back then, whispers that suggested Xia Xuanjin's military achievements were legendary. By all rights, he should have been named a king. But ancestral law stated that no one outside the imperial bloodline could hold that title, so he was named the Jindong Marquis instead. If not for that rule, he would have been the king of the East. Now, 17 generations later, the Jindong Marquis estate was still thriving. It had never seen a day of decline. In fact, it had expanded so much that it was now a 3-marquis household, 3 separate titles held within one family tree. Even though I wasn't exactly the star of the family, this was an incredible starting position. I was more than satisfied. I knew from my past life that some players who entered during the internal beta started as nobodies. Some were literally beggars on the street, a total hell mode start. Usually, the game balanced things out by giving early arrivals the worst identities. But I had broken that rule. I was born into a house of high nobility. 3rd young master. A letter from the 2nd master. A figure rushed into my small courtyard. It was Xia Qian, a young servant who looked about 16, a year younger than me. His face was flushed red, either from the biting cold wind or the frantic sprint he'd just made. I looked at him calmly. Xia Qian wasn't just a servant. He was technically family. His branch had split off from the main Xia line 200 years ago. Because of that distant blood connection, he had been sent to the estate to be raised alongside the direct heirs. He had been with me since I was 4. I took the letter from his trembling hands. My heart didn't race. I felt nothing but a slight curiosity. Has something happened outside? I asked. It's been 3 years since the last letter. This is sudden. Young master, you're as sharp as ever, Xia Qian said, his eyes shining with excitement. It's great news. The second master beheaded a third-rank great demon in the eastern wastelands. It was one of the mountain overlords. After that battle, the demon hordes retreated 100 miles. The wasteland is finally being cleared. He talked as if he had been the one to kill the beast. Everyone is saying the East will be fully pacified within a year or two. When that happens, the second master and the second madam will finally return to the capital. 14 years. It had been 14 years since I'd seen my parents. Unlike other players who just logged in to a body, I had inherited all of the original Xia Qian's memories and emotions. I didn't just have his data. I felt like I was him, just with my past life memories awakened 2 months ago. In my earliest memories, before I was 3, my father, Xia Yuan, absolutely adored me. But then came the day of the martial talent test. I was declared a waste body, someone who could never cultivate. I remembered the long silence that followed. Then, my father looked at me with a grim, determined face. He told me that even if I was a waste, I was his eldest son, and he would find a way to change my fate, no matter what. The next day, the demon tide erupted in the east. My father was appointed the commanding general, leading 100,000 soldiers. My mother, Su Xiaoxue, a powerful sorceress, went with him. I was only 3 years old. I begged to go, but they refused. They said it was too dangerous. They left me behind in the Marquis estate. For the first few months, letters came frequently. They even sent demon blood essence to help strengthen my body. But after 5 months, the letters slowed down. I told myself they were just busy with the war. A year later, I overheard the servants whispering. My mother had become pregnant just 1 month after reaching the front lines. I had a younger brother. After he was born, the letters from the East dropped to once every 6 months. By the time I was 6, they stopped entirely. The demon blood and resources stopped coming, too. I kept making excuses for them, telling myself the war was just too intense. Then, the news hit the estate. My younger brother, Xia Hao, the one born on the battlefield and raised by my parents' side, had been tested. He possessed a supreme immortal bone. He was a once-in-a-thousand-years genius. That was the moment I realized the truth. I hadn't been left behind for my safety. I had been abandoned. I had grown used to my quiet, invisible life in the estate. My aunt and uncle treated me well, almost like their own son. There were no cliché dramas with arrogant servants looking down on me. But now, my parents were coming back. And they were bringing Xia Hao, the golden child with the bone that would shine even brighter once the spiritual qi recovered. I was a stranger to them. Even the servants knew more about my father's victories than I did. You can go now, I told Xia Qian, giving him a small smile. And tell the kitchen to double my lunch portions today. Xia Qian blinked. He knew I'd been training hard lately and eating more, but double? That meant I'd be eating enough for 20 people. Still, he bowed and hurried off. I looked down at the yellowed envelope in my hand. It was embossed with a Qilin pattern. I stood there in the silence of the courtyard, beneath the budding scholar tree, and finally reached out to break the seal. I drew a deep red blade and sliced the tip of my finger. A single drop of hot, crimson blood fell onto the envelope. The Qilin pattern reacted instantly. It glowed with a blinding light, and for a heartbeat, I heard the faint, distant roar of a mythical beast. Then, the light faded. Everything went silent. I knew this was my mother's handiwork. Her name was Su Xiaoxue. We were still in the era before the full recovery of spiritual qi, but powerful martial artists and sorcerers already walked the earth. Some could hold back 100,000 soldiers alone or split a river with a single arrow. Those masters were rare, though. Most people were still ordinary, following a rough system of martial artists and sorcerers. Back in my old life, I just thought of them as warriors and mages in a game. My mother was a powerful sorceress. She had sealed this letter so only my blood could open it. It was a clever way to keep prying eyes away, a trick the brutish martial artists couldn't hope to master. I pulled out the letter. The paper felt like silk against my skin. There were only a few lines written on it. My father said he'd be home in 6 months to 2 years. He also mentioned that the emperor had granted a marriage proposal. I was to marry the second princess. He told me to behave well and not to embarrass the prestige of the Marquis' estate. A chill ran down my spine, but it wasn't from the spring breeze. The second princess? In the future I knew, she was the Empress, the most powerful being in the unified world. She was the one who would suppress the 8 wildernesses, build the great temples, and force the world into an era of destiny and luck. Under her rule, those who weren't her subjects were treated like outcasts. I tried to remember the game's plot. I had been a casual player at first, only taking things seriously when the worlds merged and death became permanent. I had never heard of the Empress having a fiancé. I racked my brain, trying to piece together the history of her time as a princess. Then it clicked. In the future, the Zhendong Marquis estate remained legendary. My younger brother, Xia Hao, the one with the supreme immortal bone, became a pillar of the empire. He was the Empress's sharpest spear. She even broke tradition to name him a king. There had been rumors, though. People whispered that Xia Hao received such honors because the Empress had once been engaged to a common member of the Marquis family during her rise to power. That man supposedly died in a bloody coup before she took the throne. His name was never recorded in history. I laughed, but there was no joy in it. That commoner was me. I was just a footnote, a piece of dark history to be wiped away, so the Empress's image remained spotless. My story was supposed to end at the palace gates, covered in blood. No wonder the world only knew Xia Hao and never mentioned he had an elder brother. My expression went cold. My eyes shifted, the pupils merging into the double pupil vision of the saint as chaotic energy swirled within them. I wasn't going to be a forgotten sacrifice. I walked back into my room and changed into formal robes. I didn't have any maids to help me. The estate removed personal servants once a male reached 12 to keep them focused on their martial arts. Too much distraction leads to a weak foundation. As I stepped back outside, a beautiful woman in a green dress approached me. Her name was Bijou. She bowed respectfully, showing none of the arrogance you'd expect from a high-ranking servant in a drama. She told me the master and madam wanted to see me. I followed her, watching her move as we walked through the courtyard. I felt a surge of heat in my blood, the result of my recent breakthrough and peak vitality. I had to look away to keep my composure. As we walked, I mapped out the family hierarchy in my head. The estate had 3 main branches. The old Marquis, Xia Chutian, was 86 and lived in seclusion, chasing a higher realm of power. He had 3 sons. The eldest, Xia Qian, ran the estate now. My father, Xia Yuan, was the second son. Then there was the third uncle, Xia Han. Bijou led me through the winding paths of the outer courtyard to the main hall. Inside sat a dignified middle-aged man and a woman who looked elegant and well-preserved. "Uncle, aunt," I said, bowing respectfully. Xia Qian looked at me and smiled. "Chinner, we're family. There's no need for such formality." Xia Qian smiled and signaled for me to stand. Beside him, his wife, Cui Mingru, looked at me with a playful, elegant gaze. She asked why I hadn't visited her courtyard for dinner lately. She teased that perhaps I was avoiding her because my mother was finally returning home. I walked over and sat down beside her. I told her I'd been buried in my martial arts practice and had simply lost track of time. As I spoke, a genuine warmth spread through my chest. My biological mother had ignored me for years, pouring every ounce of her affection into my younger brother, Xia Hao. But my uncle and aunt were different. They never looked down on me for my useless constitution. If they hadn't protected me since I was 3 years old, I wouldn't have made it this far in the Marquis estate without suffering. When I mentioned my martial arts practice, their expressions dimmed for a split second. They both sighed internally. They knew that for someone with a broken foundation like mine, 100 times the effort usually yielded nothing. We chatted for a while, looking like a perfect, happy family, until Xia Qian finally shifted the conversation to the real point of this meeting. He told me my father had achieved great things on the eastern frontier. As a reward, the emperor had issued a marriage decree. I was to be wed to the second princess. He looked me in the eye and asked for my thoughts. I didn't hesitate. I asked if there was any room to negotiate. To the rest of the world, marrying a princess was the ultimate honor. To me, it felt like a cage. The Marquis estate was powerful enough that we didn't need to beg for royal favor. In fact, The imperial family usually tried to bribe us. This marriage wasn't a gift, it was a leash. And knowing that this princess was the future empress made it even more dangerous. I had no intention of being a footstool for a woman who would one day rule the world. Aunt Chui Mingru watched me, her eyes soft with pity. She asked if I really didn't want to marry her. I told her no, absolutely not. Xiaqian shook his head with a heavy sigh. He told me the decree had already left the palace gates. It was too late. The deal was done. I fell silent. It was a joke. I was the one getting married, yet I was the last person to find out. But then, Aunt Chui revealed the ugly truth behind the arrangement. The emperor hadn't originally asked for me. He had asked for my younger brother, Xiahao. My parents had refused immediately. They argued that Xiahao was a once-in-a-century genius who needed to focus on his martial arts and couldn't be distracted by marriage. Then, they actively suggested me instead. They told the emperor that as the eldest son, I was the proper choice. The emperor had spent 3 days weighing the options before finally agreeing to my father's request. I sat there, perfectly calm on the outside, but my mind was racing. In this empire, becoming a prince consort meant you were an outer relative of the throne. By law, that meant your career was over. You were barred from holding any significant power or high-ranking positions. My parents didn't want to ruin their precious genius son's future. So, they remembered they had a spare son living in the capital. They threw me to the wolves to shield him. Uncle Xiaqian probably thought he was doing me a favor. In his eyes, since I had no future in martial arts anyway, being a pampered royal consort was a graceful way to live out my days. I kept a smile on my face, accepting the news without a fight. I understood the game now. I was just a piece of debris tossed aside in a clash of high-level politics. Even the future empress was currently being used as a political tool. If she couldn't control her fate, how could I expect to control mine? I felt a wave of bitterness, not just for myself, but for the situation. Being unable to grasp your own destiny was a miserable feeling. I wondered if the princess felt the same way. I made a vow to myself right then and there. I needed power. I needed to control my own destiny. I was lost in thought when Lu Zhu hurried into the front hall. Even in her rush, she moved with an effortless elegance. She bowed low to my uncle and aunt. "Master, madam, someone has arrived from the palace. Eunuch Yi is leading the group himself." My uncle, Xiaqian, exchanged a quick look with his wife, Chui Mingru. They knew exactly why he was here. "Chinner," my uncle said, standing up. "Come with us to welcome the imperial envoy." I stood up silently and followed them. I was walking toward my fate. At the main gates of the Marquis' estate, I saw the man Lu Zhu had mentioned. Eunuch Ye's hair was snow white, but his face was smooth and radiant, like a young man's. Despite being a eunuch, he carried an aura of immense authority. Nobody dared to look down on him. His full name was Yi Wuzheng. He had served 3 generations of emperors and survived the bloody palace coups of the past. Even now, under the empress's reign, he remained a pillar of the palace's hidden strength. His cultivation was unfathomable. He was a living treasure of the royal family. "So, this is the eldest son of the Marquis of Anong," Eunuch Yi said, his eyes crinkling as he smiled at me. "Truly a handsome young man. Congratulations." I looked at this man, the same man who would play a massive role in the coming political storms, and bowed respectfully. He seemed slightly surprised by my composure, but he nodded back, clearly impressed by my demeanor. The rest of the afternoon was a blur. We invited him inside, and I was hurried off to bathe and change into formal robes. Then came the reading of the imperial decree. I knelt, accepted the scroll, and just like that, the marriage was official. The ceremony was exhausting. Most imperial orders were simple verbal commands, but a royal marriage required every grueling detail of ancient etiquette to be followed. It was a display of prestige for both the Marquis' estate and the throne. By the time the sun began to set, I was standing in the garden, holding the dragon-patterned scroll. It was heavy, made of a material I couldn't identify. It felt surreal. I was officially the fiancé of the future empress. But a dark thought nagged at me. In the original timeline, I died during the palace coup. Was my death really an accident? Or was I a loose end that needed to be cut? I looked at my uncle and aunt walking ahead of me. I couldn't wait anymore. I stepped forward to join them. "Uncle," I said, my voice steady and loud. I have broken through to the 8th rank, the essence refining realm. I want to find a position and serve the empire. They both froze. They turned around, their faces masks of pure shock. You reached the 8th rank? My uncle asked, his voice trembling slightly. For anyone else, the 8th rank at 17 was good, maybe even talented. But in a house full of geniuses, it usually wasn't enough to cause a stir. However, I was different. They knew my history. My uncle had poured countless resources into me, rare herbs, medicinal baths, everything to strengthen my body, and for years, I had barely scraped into the 9th rank. People called me a martial waste. And now, I was telling them I had jumped a whole rank in days. I had a moment of sudden enlightenment while practicing, I explained, keeping my secret hidden. I was working on the basic saber techniques and something just clicked. I understood something new, and my cultivation followed. My uncle's expression turned grave. Enlightenment. From the basic saber techniques. Our family's basic techniques weren't actually basic. They were the result of 600 years of refinement, designed specifically to build the perfect foundation for the 9th rank. Even my uncle, my father, and my grandfather, the great Marquis himself, had never been able to improve upon them. Use mine, my uncle said suddenly. He drew a pitch-black longsword from his waist. The moment the blade left the sheath, I felt a chill run down my spine. For a split second, I saw a vision of a black flood dragon leaping from an abyss, its scales dark enough to swallow the light. It was a spirit weapon. This blade had been bathed in the blood of a 3rd-rank great demon. Its soul was literally suppressed within the steel. He handed it to me. Even though the blade's power was restrained, it was incredibly heavy. If I were still at the 9th rank, I wouldn't have even been able to hold it, let alone fight the lingering aura of the demon inside. I took the sword firmly. My uncle nodded, his eyes gleaming with newfound expectation. He could see I had the strength to handle it. I gripped the hilt, and a surge of heat erupted in my chest. My blood began to boil. A faint, golden silhouette of a great sun rose behind me. The air around us began to shimmer and warp. My aunt, who came from the prestigious Chui family and practiced the path of a sorcerer, gasped. She was sensitive to the energies of heaven and earth. She could feel it. A pure, scorching yang energy was flooding into my body. I poured every ounce of my strength into the black blade. Sun-guarding demon slayer. I roared, the words tearing from my throat. I stood in the center of the garden, but I didn't feel like I was at home. I felt like I was facing 1,000 armies and 10,000 demons. I turned my back to my family and swung the heavy sword toward the open sky. My momentum reached its peak. My blood boiled, and my spirit soared. When the blade fell, the world seemed to change color. A miniature sun flashed within the garden, blinding and brilliant. My uncle, Xia Qian, raised a single palm to catch the radiant arc of light. Even though the strike didn't break his skin, his face twisted with shock. He couldn't hide his excitement. When did you really improve the basic saber techniques? He asked. His voice was sharp, but I could tell he already believed me. He had seen it with his own eyes. The essence was the same, but the power was leagues beyond the original. This was a perfected, evolved version. My aunt, Chui Mengru, saw through it immediately. This technique draws in the essence of the sun to refine the flesh, she whispered, her eyes wide. It's not just for killing. It's a method for cultivation. To her, a sorcerer, seeing a crude warrior communicate with the energy of heaven and earth was unheard of. It was a bridge between two worlds. My uncle realized the implications instantly. In the lower realms of cultivation, the body is everything. Keep this a secret, my uncle said, his face turning deadly serious. He glanced at the servants and maids nearby. Luckily, they were all trusted family retainers. If they weren't, he likely would have silenced them right there to protect the technique. He looked at me. Are you willing to give this to the family? I didn't hesitate. It is for you to decide, uncle. I had exposed this power specifically to gain his support. Besides, the Marquis's estate had spent a fortune on me over the years. Giving back was only fair. Good, he said, his voice booming. You have done a great service for the Xia family. I will report your merit to the Hall of Elders. You can go to the technique library and pick any manual you want. And about that job you wanted outside the estate, I'll make it happen. I smiled. The Xia family had lasted 600 years because they rewarded merit fairly. I didn't care about the glory, I just wanted out. The Marquis' estate was powerful, but it wasn't mine. I needed to build my own foundation where I was the master. I wasn't the type of person to suffer for no reason. This was the home of the second princess. She was young, beautiful, and possessed a will of iron. At the head of the room sat the princess herself. Princess, that Xia Chun is a nobody in the Marquis' estate. One of her female attendants grumbled. He's a waste. How can he be worthy of you? The princess looked up, her expression unreadable. What's done is done. The emperor has spoken. She preferred Hua Qiming's logic. The Xia family wasn't just any family. They were a lineage of generals. Xia Chutian, the Marquis of Anong, had been the god of war for the previous generation. You didn't just kill his son without consequences. My grandfather, Xia Chutian, was a legend. He was unstoppable. He stopped only 30 miles from their capital. That war made him the most famous man alive, but it also made him a target. Knowing the emperor's heart, my grandfather did something brilliant. He gave up his military power, locked his gates, and focused entirely on cultivation. That move saved our family from the emperor's paranoia. It also gave the next generation a chance to shine. My uncles, Xia Qian and Xia Yuan, rose through the ranks and became leaders in their own right. 21 years ago, my uncle Xia Qian made a name for himself fighting the southern barbarians. Just like his father, he eventually stepped back, gave up his command, and returned to the capital to run the Marquis' estate. People might have forgotten his face, but nobody dared to underestimate him. Then there was my father, Xia Yuan. 14 years ago, he took command of the Eastern Desolation Front. For 13 years, he was steady and cautious. He didn't win massive victories, but he never lost a single battle. The border was like a mountain of iron. The court was relieved. They thought he was talented, but not a monster like his father or brother. They were wrong. A month ago, after 13 years of hiding his true strength, my father exploded. He slaughtered a third-rank great demon in a single night. 3 generations of legendary generals in one family. It was enough to make the world tremble and the imperial family terrified. In this chaotic world, the emperor couldn't afford to crush us. He had to win us over. That was why this marriage existed. Back in the princess's mansion, the princess herself, Yao Guang, smiled. The room seemed to brighten with her beauty. She looked at her advisors with calm, cold eyes. She had no intention of assassinating me. To her, I was just a waste, a tool to show her loyalty to the throne. But she had a secret ambition she shared with no one. She didn't want to be just another princess trapped in palace walls. She wanted to be the first empress to rule the world. Meanwhile, I was deep within the Marquis' estate, standing inside a 7-story ancient tower. The air here was thick with spiritual energy. 7 white-haired elders, the ancestors of my clan, were staring at me in absolute shock. One had jumped out of his seat. Another had accidentally plucked out a strand of his beard. A third had spilled tea all over himself. You actually improved the basic sword technique, one of them stammered. The basic sword technique was the foundation of our entire family. For 600 years, it had been the secret to our strength, passed down only to the direct bloodline. Our ancestor, Xia Xuanjin, created it, and generations of masters had refined it. We all thought it was perfect, equal even to the imperial family's techniques. But I had just demonstrated a version that was better. I had carved a crack into the floor that pulsed with a searing, solar heat. They saw it with their own eyes. They had to believe it. Good. Excellent, shouted the eldest Xiaoyu. He was my great-uncle, the older brother of the Marquis. He laughed loudly, though his eyes held a trace of deep regret. Your martial talent might be lacking, but your comprehension is godlike. Your contribution to the clan today is greater than even your father's. He was heartbroken. In his eyes, the heavens were cruel for giving me such a brilliant mind but a broken body. My other great-uncles nodded in agreement. I left the Merit Tower feeling satisfied. It was the first time I'd ever been allowed inside, and the first time I'd met these powerful old men. By showing them this sun-breaking demon blade, I had secured my position. I didn't care about fame after death, though. I just wanted to survive while I was still breathing. As I walked back through the estate, I passed the training grounds. It was a hive of activity. 6-year-olds were practicing punches. Teenagers were swinging spears with deadly precision. One boy was lifting a 1,000-pound boulder, sweat pouring down his face, his eyes full of grit. Brother Chun. A 14-year-old boy dropped his boulder and sprinted toward me like a mountain ape. He was thick-set and had a wide, honest grin. This was Xiao Wen, my cousin. His father, my third uncle Xiao Han, was a scholar who hated violence. He had named his son Wen, meaning literary, hoping for a scholar. Instead, Xiao Wen turned out to be a martial prodigy who hated books. Because I was considered a waste who couldn't practice martial arts, my uncle Xiao Han had spent years trying to drag me into his world of literature, hoping we could be scholars together. Little did he know, I was finally ready to stop hiding. My third uncle had tried to raise me to be a scholar. He wanted me to cultivate the noble spirit of the Confucian path, hoping I'd find my power through books and poetry rather than blades. I figured I'd stop by and see how you were doing. I looked around the training grounds. In the Marquis estate, every child, boy or girl, started training here at the age of 5. They worked through the blistering sun and the freezing rain, day after day. But I was the exception. As a kid, I had been stubborn. I tried to keep up. Now, looking at the field, I saw mostly new, younger faces. The kids I grew up with were gone. I knew why. Most of them had already broken through to the 8th rank essence refining realm and joined the army. That was the tradition of our house. We didn't care about age, we cared about strength. Once you hit the 8th rank, you were ready to see the world and carve out your own destiny. Brother Chun, a soft voice called out. A young girl, barely 10 years old, walked over shyly. Her skin was flushed red from her recent practice. This was Xia Yushi, the young daughter of Xia Qian and Cui Mengru. Behind her, several other disciples followed. They all gathered around to greet me. Some greeted me with genuine smiles, others with a polite nod. Nobody insulted me. They were young, but they were sharp. Our family had lasted 600 years by following one rule: respect your elders and love your kin. I greeted them all warmly, my voice gentle. But as I looked at a few specific boys, my heart grew heavy with focus. I knew these faces. In the future, I remembered, these boys would become legends. My eyes drifted to a cold-looking 12-year-old standing on the edge of the crowd. His name was Xiai Chen. Right now, he was just a quiet kid from a side branch. In the future era of unification, he would be a god general, commanding the Great Wu Iron Cavalry and dominating the battlefields of the eastern wastelands. Then there was Xia Haoyu, the grandson of the 6th elder. His future achievements were just as terrifying. Brother Chen, are you going out for training soon? Xiaowen asked, his eyes bright with excitement. I told him I was heading to the Merit Tower first, then leaving the estate for a while. I'm almost at the 8th rank myself, Xiaowen said, puffing out his chest. Once I break through, I'll come find you. I was stunned. Xiaowen wasn't even 12 yet. To be that close to the 8th rank was incredible. He truly was one of the brightest stars of the Xia family's future. It felt like the entire world was waking up. The golden generation was emerging, and the 600 years of the Xia family's accumulated luck was finally about to explode into greatness. I had to seize this moment before the storm arrived. I made my way to the Merit Tower. It was a massive 7-story structure. I had only been here once before to learn basic blade skills, but now, thanks to my new status, I had access to everything below the 6th floor. I didn't rush to the top. I started on the 1st floor, walking toward the right-hand shelves. I picked up a book titled Whirlwind Sword Technique and began to flip through it. My eyes moved fast, but I wasn't actually reading the words. Record technique, I commanded internally. A virtual panel flickered in my vision. A loading bar appeared, 1%, 25%, 100%. Even though I was no longer a player in this world, my auxiliary system had stayed with me. It was fully unlocked now. It could help me comprehend advanced moves and record every book I touched. This system had evolved into the spirit recovery version, far more advanced than what the future players would have when they eventually arrived. I was playing a version of the game that was years ahead of everyone else. I walked through the 1st floor like a tourist, but I was actually draining the library dry. The Xia family's collection was vast. Even after filtering out the junk, the 1st floor was a sea of manuals. I focused on the most important ones and then moved to the second floor. The second floor was for the 8th rank. It was filled with manuals for swords, sabers, spears, and body tempering. There were even records on military formations and methods for Taoist sorcerers. I focused heavily on the military formations. In this world, a single powerful martial artist was scary, but a disciplined army could condense slaughter chi into a force that could kill even the strongest masters. Most of what I found were basic formations, 3-man or 5-man squads. A few went up to 7. I wasn't disappointed. These were the foundations. The truly legendary formations, the ones that allowed a commander to harness the power of 10,000 soldiers and fight enemies levels above them, were the lifeblood of the great houses. Those were kept on the 5th floor or higher. In the entire Great Wu Empire, fewer than 10 families possessed formations of that scale. I took a deep breath and headed deeper into the tower. Old Man Huang and Old Man Hong exchanged confused glances. From their vantage point, they had been watching my bizarre behavior on the 2nd floor for a while. These two were my granduncles, the 4th and 6th elders of the Xia family. Old Man Hong's grandson was Xia Haoyu, the genius I'd seen earlier at the martial arts arena. Their sole duty was to guard this tower. They had already heard that I'd modified the basic saber techniques, so they were paying close attention to me. But they didn't like what they saw. "What is he doing?" Old Man Hong asked, his brow furrowed. "He's just glancing at them and moving on." With 70 years of experience, he couldn't make heads or tails of my actions. "You're asking me? Who am I supposed to ask?" Old Man Huang grumbled, tugging at his beard. He was just as lost. The boy has talent, but he's too young. His mind isn't settled, and his martial foundation is weak. He needs guidance. If he becomes arrogant and flighty now, his future achievements will be pathetic. Old Man Hong watched me for a moment longer before shaking his head. To a martial artist, focus was everything. You pick a goal, and you strike like a falling axe. But I was picking up manuals and putting them down seconds later. To them, I looked indecisive and shallow. "What a waste," Old Man Hong sighed. They eventually looked away, losing interest. On the outside, I looked calm. On the inside, I was ecstatic. Every time a progress bar hit 100% on my system panel, I wanted to cheer. I wasn't just browsing. I was planning to drain the entire Marquis library dry. An hour passed. I finished recording the unique techniques on the 2nd floor and climbed to the 3rd. The selection here was smaller, but the quality was on another level. I even found Taoist and Buddhist scriptures tucked away in a special corner. I was stunned the Xia family possessed these. I prioritized these immediately, recording every single word. I cleared the 3rd floor, then the 4th. Finally, I reached the 5th floor. The space here was vast, but it held only about 100 manuals. I noticed a difference immediately. It took longer to record these. On the 1st floor, it took 2 seconds. Here, it took nearly 2 minutes per book. I stayed patient. Those scrolls hummed with a special rhythm, containing righteous chi that would be invaluable to a scholar warrior. I stood before them and let the system copy every stroke. Once the 5th floor was fully recorded, I picked up a body tempering manual called the Red Goat Body Severing Art. I sat down, pretending to read it intensely. "System," I whispered in my mind. "Deduce and instill." A progress bar appeared. 5%, 35%, 78%. The process took 3 minutes. Suddenly, my skin turned scalding hot. It felt like my blood and bones were being forged in a furnace, with a divine blacksmith hammering out every impurity. My eyes glowed with the silhouette of a rising sun. The red goat, essence fused with the great sun, intent I had already mastered. My blood grew thick and heavy, radiating intense heat. The air on the 5th floor began to shimmer. It felt like the height of a blistering summer. I sat there like a piece of steel fresh from the forge. Suddenly, Old Man Hong and Old Man Huang appeared in the room, their faces grim. He realized the red goat art. Old Man Hong gasped. Already? He mastered the true intent that quickly. They were stunned. The red goat body severing art was no joke. It was useful even for 4th rank masters. That's why it was kept on the 5th floor. They had been watching me waste time all afternoon, and then, out of nowhere, I'd achieved a breakthrough. I slowly opened my eyes. The golden light faded, and the heat radiating from my pores retracted. My skin returned to its normal color. "Fourth uncle? Sixth uncle?" I asked, putting on a look of innocent surprise. "What are you doing here? How did you learn that so fast?" Old Man Hong demanded. He wasn't one for patience. I rubbed the back of my head, acting a bit dim-witted. "I don't know. I was just looking at it, and suddenly, I just felt it." Old Man Hong choked on his words. Was it really that simple? Old Man Huang didn't say anything. He stepped forward and grabbed my wrist. I felt a surge of cold energy enter my body as he scanned my meridians. He suspected something was wrong with me. But as his energy traveled through my paths, he found nothing but a rock-solid foundation and immense physical strength. "His talent is clearly average," Huang muttered, looking baffled. "It shouldn't be suited for martial arts. And yet his foundation is terrifyingly deep. This makes no sense." He looked at me. "Out of all these manuals, why did you pick this one? And what were you doing earlier, flipping through books like a madman?" I lowered my head, looking slightly embarrassed. I heard that the ancient sages studied thousands of books to create their own paths. I wanted to follow their example, even if I'm not worthy. As for this book, it felt similar to the saber technique I learned before. I had a feeling about it, so I picked it. Old Man Huang let out a sudden snort, which turned into a full-blown belly laugh. You want to emulate the ancient sages?" He laughed until his eyes teared up. Old Man Huang laughed until tears welled up in his eyes. He hadn't heard anything this funny in years. But then he caught himself. He realized his laughter might crush a young man's spirit. He cleared his throat and tried to sound stern. "Do you have any idea how big the world is?" he asked me. "You don't have the experience yet. Your cultivation level is too low. Browsing through thousands of books is a waste of time for someone at your stage. You need to focus. You need to pick one path and master it." He leaned in, his voice dropping an octave. "Even the most talented geniuses only pick one main path and maybe one supporting skill. If you learn too many things, your mind becomes cluttered. It will ruin your cultivation and your state of mind." I nodded quickly, looking like a student taking in a lecture. "Your martial talent might be average," Old Man Hong added, trying to be encouraging, "but your comprehension is exceptional. If you stay focused, you might actually achieve something in the future." "I understand," I replied humbly. I stayed a while longer, listening as the two elders shared tips on cultivation and common pitfalls to avoid. They were patient, treating me like a true member of the clan for once. When I finally bowed and left the library pavilion, I could feel their eyes on my back. As soon as I was out of earshot, Old Man Hong sighed deeply. "What a waste. The boy's comprehension is monstrous, yet he has a trash body. Heaven is truly unfair. Why didn't they let him study the scholar's path?" "I heard he spent his childhood following the third master, Xia Han," Old Man Huang said, his voice full of regret. "If he had stayed on that path, he could have cultivated righteous qi. With his brain, our Xia family might have produced a great scholar. We've been a family of rough warriors for 600 years. The court officials always look down on us. A great scholar would have balanced our family's destiny." Old Man Hong remained silent for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "I heard that years ago, the second master sent a letter back from the eastern wasteland battlefield. He told the third master that his son must practice martial arts. He said that even if the boy was a waste, and even if he was destined to bleed out on a battlefield one day, he should die with a blade in his hands, not a pen." The library pavilion fell into a heavy silence. "Xia Yuan was a good man," Old Man Huang whispered eventually. "A great general. He never shamed the Marquis's estate. But as a father, he lacked a certain something." He shook his head, thinking about how cold Xia Yuan had been toward his own son. Little did they know, the boy they were pitying was no longer the same person. I returned to my courtyard as night fell. The moon hung high, casting silver light that danced across my fingertips. This single day had been more exciting than my previous 2 months combined. "Young master," my servant, Xia Qian, called out as he ran to meet me. "I heard the news. The emperor has betrothed the second princess to you. The whole estate is talking about it. The other courtyards have already started sending gifts. Just take care of them for me," I said, waving him off. I didn't want to waste energy on social games. For the next 2 days, I stayed inside my courtyard and pushed myself to the limit. The pure yang qi inside me grew thick and vibrant. I used the demon-breaking saber to draw in the sun's energy, tempering my flesh and blood. At the same time, I practiced the red sun body refinement art to strengthen my bones and internal energy. The two techniques complemented each other perfectly. My physique was undergoing a radical transformation. On the third day, the peace was broken. A man knocked on my gate. It was Xia Dong, my uncle Xia Qian's most trusted aide. "Third young master," he said, bowing slightly. "The master asks for your presence." "Uncle Dong, why did you come yourself?" I asked. I was shirtless, my skin glowing from the workout. I quickly grabbed his shirt and invited him in. Xia Dong wasn't just a servant. He shared the Xia bloodline, coming from a branch that split off over 100 years ago. He had grown up with my uncle, followed him to the military, and even earned the rank of general 21 years ago for his service on the southern frontier. When my uncle retired, Xia Dong followed him back to the estate. "It concerns your future, young master," Xia Dong said with a smile. He looked at my skin, noticing the metallic, reddish tint fading back to normal. His eyes flickered with surprise. "It was better I came personally. We're family, Uncle Dong. No need for such formalities," I said, leading him to a seat. "Let me wash up, and I'll be right with you." I moved with a steady, grounded pace. I already knew why I was being summoned. The official position I asked for was finally ready. The Marquis's estate was massive. It took me 20 minutes to walk to my uncle's quarters. When I arrived, Xia Qian was sitting in the front hall, sipping tea. "You wanted to gain experience outside the house," my uncle said, setting his cup down. "I've looked into it. There are 3 positions available, and all of them are quite good." I smiled. Having the backing of a marquis made everything easier. In my past life, it would have taken months of grinding just to become a low-level clerk. Now I had options. "The first is the Imperial Guard in the capital," Xia Qian explained. "The second is a position in the Qingzhou Prefecture garrison. The third is with the Southern Border Army. All 3 are 7th-rank positions." I didn't hesitate. As a descendant of a noble house, I was entitled to enter the government at a high rank. There was no point in starting as a common soldier just to prove a point. Starting from the top was just common sense. "I'll take the Imperial Guard," I said firmly. The Imperial Guard protected the Emperor, the palace, and the capital. They patrolled the streets, managed the city gates, and, most importantly, had the power to investigate and enforce the law within the capital. The capital was full of powerful people. You couldn't throw a brick without hitting a royal relative. But if I played my cards right, that enforcement power would give me the leverage I needed to seize control of my own fate. I knew that in 5 years, during the coup of the palace gates, the Imperial Guard would play a massive role. If I wanted to survive, I needed to start placing my pieces on the board now. I immediately ruled out the local garrison. The Southern Border Army was great for grinding experience and military merit, but it was useless to me right now. I had a leveling system for my cultivation, so I wasn't worried about speed. Military merit was good for promotions, but staying at the heart of power in the capital offered far more opportunities. "Are you sure?" my uncle asked, his voice serious. "I'm sure, uncle," I replied without a second of hesitation. "I want the Imperial Guard." "Fine. Wait for my word," Xia Qian said, waving his hand with a smile. I turned and left, feeling the weight lift off my shoulders. I had been in this world for 2 months. Finally, I was leaving this starter village. The capital. I was coming. In my past life, when I played this world as a game, I started as a commoner and saw the city's prosperity from the bottom. This time, I was starting at the top, though the Marquis's estate had felt more like a prison. I hadn't even been allowed to leave the gates until I reached the 8th rank. As I walked back to my room, a strange thought hit me. Why did I still remember everything from my old world? The philosophies of the 100 schools, the Buddhist and Taoist scriptures, the classic poems, it was all still there. In the game, players remembered their friends and family, but all cultural knowledge was blocked. It was as if this world wouldn't allow those outside ideas to exist. The restriction only lifted much later in the game's timeline during the Convergence of Heavens patch. I suspected it had something to do with the fundamental laws of this world. Certain scriptures and truths weren't allowed to manifest early. Yet, here I was, the one person who had slipped through the cracks. I took a deep breath and looked down at my palm. The faint silhouette of the 9-dragon jade seal shimmered there, visible only to me. "Where did you come from?" I whispered. This seal had brought me here early. It had preserved my system. It had broken the knowledge filter. As I spoke, the seal suddenly emitted a hazy, pulsing light. It felt like it was waking up, trying to respond to my voice. My pupils constricted. For 2 months, I had tried to trigger this thing with no luck. Now, strands of light were actually leaking out. I quickened my pace, cutting through the massive estate and ducking into my room. I slammed the door shut. My palm felt like it was on fire. It was a searing heat, as if something was trying to grow right out of my flesh. I felt a deep, primal connection to the seal. We were 2 parts of the same soul. Chaos energy began to swirl within the jade. In a daze, I saw flashes of divine order and golden chains of law. Mysterious runes surfaced on the seal's face. Suddenly, a vision flooded my mind. I saw 10,000 living beings prostrating themselves on the ground. I saw a massive altar, millions of miles wide, built from 5-colored chaos stone. An ancient, terrifying sacrificial chant echoed in my ears, a sound that seemed to pierce through the heavens themselves. "Are you calling me?" I muttered. My head spun. The sound was deafening, sending goosebumps racing down my arms. The illusory seal in my hand began to solidify. It was becoming real, descending into this world from some unknown void. I couldn't help myself. I stepped toward the seal as it floated in the center of the room, radiating thick purple mist. The moment I touched it, the world vanished. I was sucked inside. Outside, the room was silent. In the Marquis estate, a place filled with legendary masters, not a single soul noticed I was gone. I hit the ground and scanned my surroundings. I was in a strange, frozen world. Everything was locked in ice and deathly silence, except for the small patch of ground where I stood. I was on a high, 5-colored altar. Items were laid out before me. There was a prehistoric beast larger than a mountain, its blood still dripping as if it had just been slaughtered. I saw a chunk of chaos jade marrow and a glowing, golden egg. "A phoenix egg?" I whispered. I had never seen these things before, yet the information popped into my head instantly. Further away, I saw another egg pulsing with life, mirroring the phoenix egg. A dragon egg. My heart hammered against my ribs. Pure-blooded dragons and phoenixes were extinct. In the era of spiritual recovery, a few drops of their blood could make a man a god. Here, they were just sitting on an altar. Who were these sacrifices for? The heavens? No. I looked around and realized I was standing above the clouds. I was sitting atop the 9 heavens. This was a vast complex of palaces built from the stars themselves, spanning millions of miles. In this moment, I felt like the god of this place. I had some level of authority, a glimpse into the entire world. I tried to reach for the sacrifices, but an invisible barrier shoved me back. My clearance wasn't high enough yet. I didn't dwell on it. I looked out at the frozen ruins. Was this the heavenly court? A celestial empire that once ruled everything, now fallen and encased in ice. I saw frozen heavenly soldiers. A roar shattered the silence. A golden dragon, miles long, erupted from the Zixiao Palace. It moved through the air, but it looked haggard and weak. Its golden light was fading, as if it were about to vanish from existence entirely. The Dragon of Providence. The dragon's eyes were full of intelligence. When it saw me standing there, a flash of pure, intense joy lit up its fading gaze. In the blink of an eye, it lunged toward me. The golden dragon lunged before I could even react. It dived straight into my forehead, merging into my very soul. I felt like I was going to explode. A massive wave of energy flooded my body, and for a split second, my meridians shattered into a million pieces. The pain was blinding. But then, a surge of vibrant life followed the destruction. My flesh, which had been dissolving, began to regrow instantly. It was a cycle of death and rebirth. My body became a vessel, struggling to hold a balance between these two opposing forces. Then, my eyes felt a stinging, violent heat. The faint power of the saint pupils I had felt before finally awakened. My pupils mutated, splitting and shifting until 2 distinct pupils appeared in each eye. One represented yin, the other yang, like the sun and moon meeting in a single gaze. A purple-gold mist swirled around me. The golden dragon flashed one last time before dissolving into my eyes. I had gained the Saint pupils. This was a legendary phenomenon, something reserved for the ancient sages and god emperors of old. It was said that anyone born with these eyes possessed the destiny of a saint. As long as they didn't die young, they were destined to rule the heavens. I don't know how long the process lasted, but when I finally came to, my body felt different. It felt forged, like indestructible diamond. I realized that the golden dragon was actually the condensed providence of this ruined heavenly court. I stood there, my expression grim. In this world, a dynasty can gather the luck and destiny of the people into providence. Officials use that power to cultivate. That's why nations go to war. They are fighting for the right to control that energy. Only a true ruler, a king or emperor, is supposed to be able to host a dragon of providence. And yet, I had just absorbed one. I searched my body, but the dragon had vanished without a trace. Even so, my spirit felt like it was at an all-time peak. My state of mind was better than it had ever been. My foundation had been completely reshaped. I wasn't a martial waste anymore. I checked my internal strength and gasped. I had broken through again. I was now in the 7th rank, the spirit-refining realm. Even though I had a system to help me level up, this sudden jump was staggering. That burst of energy had almost killed me, but the life force hidden within it had forced a total nirvana. I calmed my breathing and started walking through the ruins. I headed toward the Hall of Lingxiao. Time seemed to lose all meaning. I walked for what felt like hours, or maybe years. Space itself seemed to stretch and warp. Finally, I reached the Zixiao Palace. Inside, I saw them. Massive gods, their bodies larger than mountains, stood frozen in time. Their gazes were powerful enough to pierce the underworld, and their breath could crush rivers. But they were all motionless, heads bowed in a deep salute toward the front of the hall. It looked like they had exhausted their very lives to offer this final sign of respect. In their chests, I saw mysterious crystals glowing, the laws of the great Tao. I was stunned. The 9-dragon jade seal in my hand was far more powerful than I ever imagined. It didn't just contain power. It contained an entire fallen empire. I looked toward the object of the god's worship. There stood a towering figure. Stars circled him like dust. 9 true dragons draped across his arms like mere ornaments. He just stood there, but the aura of a supreme emperor radiated from him, demanding the submission of 10,000 paths. I looked at his face, and my heart skipped a beat. As the chaos mist around his head cleared, I saw his eyes. He had them too. The natural-born Saint pupils. Suddenly, my own eyes reacted. They began to pulse, resonating with the emperor's gaze. It was like 2 long-lost kin recognizing each other. A beam of purple-gold light shot out from the emperor's eyes straight at me. Not again. I tried to back away, remembering how the dragon had forced its way in, but I couldn't move. The entire world seemed to roar. The light slammed into my brain, and a massive flood of information exploded in my mind. I let out a choked groan, my vision went black, and I collapsed. When I opened my eyes, the first light of dawn was hitting the horizon. The darkness over the capital was fading. I looked at the clock on my wall, a specialized tool made by the palace alchemists. Only one night had passed. I checked my body immediately. My spirit felt drained, but my blood and physical strength were at their absolute peak. I wasn't dreaming. I really was in the 7th rank. I looked at my palm. The jade seal tattoo glowed faintly, reflecting in my eyes. I felt a deep, soul-bound connection to the artifact now. But when I tried to remember exactly what happened in that frozen palace, a sharp, stabbing pain hit my skull. A name appeared in my mind, the supreme scripture of the earthly way. It was a cultivation manual, but when I tried to read the details, it was like looking through a thick fog. I couldn't unlock the text. Maybe the spiritual chi in the world wasn't high enough yet, or maybe I needed to actually establish a kingdom and gather my own providence before I could read it. I sat on my bed and spent the rest of the morning recovering. My body was strong, but it clearly wasn't ready to handle the full weight of that emperor's legacy yet. By the afternoon, I felt like myself again. I went out into the courtyard to practice my forms. My fists cut through the air, creating loud, echoing booms with every strike. The difference between the 8th and 7th rank was night and day. At the 7th rank, I could be a commander of 1,000 men in the army or a respected master in the martial world. Young master, your papers are here. I stopped my training as my uncle, Xia Qian, ran into the yard. He was holding a set of official documents and a bundle of heavy armor. The Imperial Guard had sent my commission. I took the papers and began to read. The official appointment papers came directly from the Ministry of War. With that single scroll, I ceased to be a commoner and officially entered the world of politics. My starting point was a 7th-rank lieutenant. I couldn't help but smile. The status of being the legal son of a marquis was incredibly useful. In my past life, I had spent years of blood and sweat to climb to the 7th rank. Now, it was handed to me on a silver platter. 600 years of the marquis's glory, countless military achievements, and the lives of my ancestors were all wrapped up in this document. I knew exactly why I had received this, and I wasn't going to waste the opportunity. Young master, when do you leave for your post? Xia Qian asked. His eyes were shining with excitement. He had spent his whole life inside the marquis's estate and was desperate to see the world. He was talented, too, having broken through to the 8th rank of essence refining just a month ago. Tomorrow, I said calmly. I had been waiting 2 months for this moment. So soon? I want to go with you. I nodded. In the Great Wu Dynasty, it was an unwritten rule that children of noble families could bring personal retainers when they took a military post. It helped them control the troops and kept them safe on the battlefield. The civil officials never complained about it. If they did, the military families would just offer to send the officials' children to the front lines to fight barbarians and monsters instead. That usually shut them up pretty quickly. The next morning, I rose before dawn. I put on my official military uniform and walked out into the courtyard. Xia Qian was already waiting at the gate. Behind him stood 3 men with powerful auras. I could tell at a glance that they weren't ordinary. They were surrounded by a faint, murderous intent that only comes from true combat. Young master, the 4 of them said in unison. These were the family retainers. Every noble son was assigned a few to act as bodyguards and to help them establish a foundation in the army. I didn't say much. I just nodded and led them out of the estate. The Marquis's mansion was located in the heart of the capital, right next to the Imperial Palace. We stepped onto the central avenue, a road so wide it could fit 12 carriages side by side. Even in the early morning, the city was alive. Vendors lined the streets, and the sound of horses and wagons filled the air. The capital was like a massive machine, waking up and beginning to roar. We grabbed a quick breakfast at a roadside stall and headed straight for the Yulin Guard headquarters. Because they were responsible for the emperor's safety, they weren't stationed outside the city. Their office was grand and imposing, sitting right in the shadow of the palace walls. Halt! Who goes there? A group of fully armored soldiers blocked our path. They were polite but firm. I didn't bother with any dramatic reveals or try to hide my identity. I just handed over my papers. I am Xia Qian. I'm here to report for duty. The soldiers immediately straightened up and gave a military salute. Lieutenant Xia. Word had already spread that a new lieutenant was being dropped into their ranks. They knew I was the son of the Marquis of Anong. I kept my expression cold and serious, giving off an air of someone who shouldn't be messed with. Lieutenant, let me show you inside. A small squad leader named Li Shi said. He hurried to my side, his face covered in a humble, flattering smile. As he led me away, I heard the soldiers at the gate whispering behind my back. They wondered why their boss was acting so subservient. The Yulin Guard were the emperor's elite. They were mostly noble sons or the fiercest warriors from other camps. They were used to seeing generals, so a mere lieutenant usually didn't get this kind of treatment. But I wasn't just any lieutenant. I was the famous waist of the capital, now backed by the power of the Marquis. Li Shi led me through the back of the headquarters, which opened up into a massive training ground. It looked like a full military camp. In the center, several squads were busy practicing their drills. Where are my men? I asked. Over there, Lieutenant, Li Shi said. He bit his lip, looking hesitant. I frowned, sensing something was wrong. Speak up. Li Shi shook his head. You should see for yourself, sir. I didn't press him. I walked toward the back right corner of the camp. As I got closer, I heard the sound of loud laughter and cheering. Haha, I won again. Drinks are on me at the restaurant tonight. I stopped outside a large tent. I heard the distinct sound of cards hitting a table. They were gambling. My unit was supposed to be training, but instead, they were huddled inside, playing games and betting money. Beside me, Xia Qian turned red with anger. In the middle of the morning, while everyone else is training. He moved to shout at them, but I held up a hand to stop him. My eyes had changed since my breakthrough. I could see right through the thick fabric of the tent. I saw the stacks of coins and the lazy expressions on their faces. I didn't look angry. I didn't even look annoyed. My calm expression actually seemed to scare Li Shi. He probably thought I lacked the spine to confront them. I stepped forward and yanked the tent flap open. A blast of cold morning air rushed inside. The two soldiers guarding the entrance, who had been nodding off, jumped up in a fright. They looked at me, their faces twisting with sudden rage at being disturbed. The two guards inside the tent were still half asleep, their eyes blurry and red. When they saw a stranger walk in, they didn't hesitate. They barked at me, demanding to know who I was and how I dared to trespass into a military camp. They knew every face in the Imperial Guard, or so they thought, which gave them the confidence to be loud and arrogant. Their shouting drew the attention of everyone inside. Groups of soldiers huddled around card tables suddenly stood up. I remained calm, my expression unreadable. "Who is in charge here?" I asked. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room. The tent went silent. A few soldiers recognized me immediately. Their faces paled, and they scrambled to hide their gambling cards inside their armor. But others didn't seem to care. They stayed where they were, smirks playing on their lips. There was no respect in their eyes, only mockery. "Well, if it isn't young Master Xia," a sarcastic voice rang out. "You're certainly in a hurry. The appointment only came down yesterday, and here you are, already rushing to take office." A burly young man stood up from the center of the crowd. He flicked the cards in his hand and stared at me with a look that was pure provocation. This was Zhao Yu, a commander in the Forest Guards and the third son of the Marquis of Jinwu. I already knew who he was. My family had sent me files on every officer under my command the night before, and Zhao Yu's name had been highlighted. I knew exactly why he hated me. I had stolen his spot. If I hadn't been dropped into this position by imperial decree, the promotion to lieutenant would have been his. He had already bragged to his men that he'd be buying them all dinner once the news was official. 3 days later, I arrived, and his plans were ruined. Zhao Yu's eyes burned with rage. That lieutenant's uniform was supposed to be his. Instead, it was draped over the shoulders of a man the entire city called a martial waste. "Do you know the penalty for leading a gambling ring in the barracks?" I asked, ignoring his glare. I was a political appointment, sure, but so was he. He hadn't earned his way into the Imperial Guard through merit. He was here because of his father. Everyone hates privilege until they have it. My family had spent 600 years bleeding for this empire. If my family's standing put me above his, that was simply the way of the world. "There are no missions today," Zhao Yu countered, his voice dripping with indifference. "We're just having some fun in our downtime. Does the young master have a problem with that?" "Address me by my rank when we are on duty," I said, my eyes narrowing. "And I am the one asking the questions." I kept my voice flat, but a sudden, heavy pressure filled the tent. Zhao Yu flinched. He felt a wave of intimidation that he had only ever experienced around his father or high-ranking court officials. His face flushed with shame. He couldn't believe he had been rattled by a single sentence from a man he considered trash. "What? Is the new lieutenant trying to make an example out of me on his first day?" Zhao Yu snarled. His family had warned him to stay quiet and not cause trouble, but he couldn't swallow his pride. We were both sons of marquises. Even if I was the heir to the house of Anong, he knew I was neglected by my father. To him, I was a failure who brought shame to the martial nobility. He was determined to break me. If he could humiliate me in front of the men today, I would never be able to lead them. Outside the tent, a crowd of soldiers began to gather, whispering and trying to catch a glimpse of the confrontation. The news spread fast, and anyone not on active drill ran over to watch the show. In the center of the camp, 2 middle-aged men sat drinking tea, watching the commotion from a distance. "Should we step in?" one asked. "Just drink your tea," the other replied. "It's a clash between 2 noble sons. There's no need for us to get involved." "But Xia Chun is the heir of Anong," the first man, a general named Qin Mu, said worriedly. We are the Emperor's personal guard. If we let Zhao Yu keep this up, it might get out of hand. Be patient, the senior general, Li Wenzhong, said firmly. Because of his status, we must stay out of it. If he can't handle his own men on the first day, he'll be a disappointment to certain people. You mean someone is watching him? Qin Mu whispered, his eyes widening. He almost spoke a specific title, but Li Wenzhong silenced him with a sharp look. We serve the Emperor, Li Wenzhong said quietly. Noble sons come and go, but who enters and how they enter is always significant. Without His Majesty's nod, not even the House of Anong could force a man into this position. Inside the tent, my voice rang out again, loud enough for everyone outside to hear. Disrespecting a superior, inciting a riot, and gambling in the barracks. Do you know the punishment for these 3 crimes? Zhao Yu frowned. My calmness was starting to grate on his nerves. He hated that I was looking down on him like he was nothing. You think you can punish me? Zhao Yu laughed loudly. As he laughed, several soldiers stepped forward, lining up behind him in a show of force. Behind me, Xia Qian and my 3 guards stopped suppressing their energy. Their bloodlust filled the air. Combined, these crimes call for 100 strikes of the military cane and immediate expulsion from the army, I said. Anyone who stands in my way will be treated as an accomplice. The atmosphere shifted instantly. I didn't wait for a rebuttal. I let my inner energy explode. My blood felt thick and boiling, and the phantom silhouette of a great sun manifested behind me, radiating intense heat. I reached back and drew the crimson longblade. In one fluid motion, I swung. The blade cut through the air like a falling star, trailing a path of fire straight toward Zhao Yu. The hair on Zhao Yu's arm stood on end. He felt a sharp, splitting sensation wash over him, the unmistakable chill of a life-or-death crisis. Open, he roared, desperately drawing his military saber. He poured every ounce of his inner energy into the blade, trying to block my strike. He hadn't expected it. He truly hadn't expected that the famous martial waste of the capital would actually dare to draw a blade against him in public. More importantly, he couldn't understand why this single strike felt so terrifying. Intense sparks ignited where our blades collided. The moment they touched, Zhao Yu's face twisted. He felt a gargantuan, overwhelming force surging through his weapon. He let out a muffled grunt, his face turning a deep, sickly crimson. A spray of blood erupted from his mouth as he was sent flying backward. He smashed through the tent wall, tearing the fabric, and crashed into a soldier who had been eavesdropping outside. The 2 of them tumbled across the dirt, clearing together. Silence fell over the entire camp. Every soldier froze. It happened too fast. No one had time to process it. I had actually struck him. I was completely uninhibited, ignoring every unspoken rule of social standing. They stared at Zhao Yu, whose arms hung limply at his sides as blood leaked from the corner of his mouth. Commander Zhao, someone finally screamed, rushing out of a nearby tent to help him. I thought the new captain looked refined, but he's got a hell of a temper, someone whispered in the distance. Wasn't he supposed to be a famous waste? How is he this strong? Zhao Yu is at the peak of the 8th rank. The soldiers exchanged shocked looks. I had defeated Zhao Yu with a single blow. Zhao Yu came from a marquis's household. His cultivation techniques were top tier, and he could usually hold his own against 7th rank experts. Even if he had been caught off guard, this defeat was far too clean. Li Shi, the man who had led me in, stared with wide eyes. He had expected a conflict, but he never imagined the local bully would suffer such a crushing defeat the moment I arrived. His gaze toward me began to shift. It seemed the waste of the marquis's house actually possessed real power. Even my own men, Xia Qian and the guards, had ripples of shock in their eyes. Xia Qian realized that I had changed significantly lately. Not only were my thoughts impossible to read, but my strength was skyrocketing at an unnatural pace. I remained expressionless. I slowly slid the crimson long blade back into its sheath. Reaching out, I flicked the tent curtain aside and stepped out. The sunlight spilled over me, bathing me in a golden glow that made me look almost divine and untouchable. What a handsome face, was the first thought that crossed the minds of those seeing me clearly for the first time. Even in armor, without the fine silks of a noble son, my temperament was far too sharp to ignore. I walked slowly toward Zhao Yu. He was pale and withered, his energy completely broken. When he saw me approaching, he tried to lift his arms, but I had shattered the bones in both his limbs with that single strike. 3 of his personal retainers jumped up, blocking my path. "What do you think you're doing to our master?" they demanded. I didn't bother answering them. Instead, I looked around the camp. My voice wasn't loud, but it rippled through the air like a heavy bell. "Zhao Yu has shown contempt for his superior. I have taken him down. Where is the 1st Battalion?" The surrounding soldiers looked at each other. Slowly, realization dawned. They began to scramble, gathering in the open space. Those who were hesitant saw their comrades falling into line and glanced at the bleeding Zhao Yu on the ground. They grit their teeth and joined the formation. Within seconds, all 98 men of the 1st Battalion were standing at attention. "Where are the disciplinary officers?" I asked. 5 men stepped forward with crisp, disciplined movements. They weren't stupid. This new captain didn't even care about the Zhao family. He had beaten a marquis's son without blinking. His authority was at its peak, and they didn't dare delay. "Give him 100 strikes of the military cane," I said, my voice cold and devoid of emotion. "Then, have the House of Jingwu come and collect him. As of today, he is expelled from the Imperial Guard." A shiver ran through the crowd. "Ex-expelled?" Li Zheng, the disciplinary captain, asked with a tremor in his voice. "Do you have a hearing problem?" I looked at him. "Or do you need me to repeat myself?" Li Zheng felt as if a prehistoric beast was staring him down. For some reason, this new captain exerted a pressure even more suffocating than the high-ranking ministers in the imperial court. "Understood." Li Zheng nodded frantically. What right? What right do you have to expel me?" Zhao Yu managed to wheeze out. The shock of the news caused him to spit out another mouthful of blood. His eyes were bloodshot. If he was truly kicked out of the guards, he wouldn't just lose face. He'd never be able to show his face in the capital's social circles again. His entire family would become a laughingstock. I ignored him. The man was a fool. He had been gambling openly in the barracks and then dared to provoke me so blatantly. The military values hierarchy above all else. He had essentially handed me the sword to kill the chicken and warn the monkeys. I wondered how a man as brilliant as the Marquis of Jingwu could have sired such a moron. "Why are you still standing there?" I looked at Li Zheng. Li Zheng shuddered and motioned for his men. Zhao Yu's retainers tried to intervene, but Xia Qian and my guards moved instantly, disarming them before they could even draw. My men had been bored, waiting for a chance to show their strength, but I had already handled the situation myself. The soldiers watched as Zhao Yu was dragged away. A moment later, his agonizing screams echoed from the distance, making everyone's skin crawl. He was the son of a marquis, yet I had treated him like trash. If I didn't fear the House of Jingwu, why would I care about their backgrounds? No one dared to look down on me anymore. In the center of the camp, Commander Qin Mu nodded in approval. Clean and decisive. Like a master warrior, he struck fast and hard to establish his position. Li Wenzhong set his cup down, looking slightly annoyed. "He's your subordinate now. Once he's finished stabilizing his control, bring him to see me." Entering the Feather Forest Guards and not reporting to me first? He has no manners at all. "Be respectful," Qin Mu whispered to himself, his voice tight with caution. Li Wenzhong sighed heavily, looking at the steam rising from his tea. The Feather Forest Guards might be elite, but they were a small pond for a fish like me. I wasn't just the heir of the Marquis of Anong anymore. I was the future prince consort. My status was too explosive to treat like a common subordinate. Even Li Wenzhong couldn't guess the emperor's game. The Son of Heaven had grown increasingly unpredictable with age. Was I placed in the Imperial Guards as a shield, a spy, or something else entirely? The Saint's gaze was always watching this camp. I followed Qin Mu through the sprawling military grounds toward the general's tent. The Feather Forest Guards consisted of 3,000 men, led by a general, a 4th-rank official. Under him were 3 commanders, each leading 1,000. Qin Mu was one of them, making him my direct superior. As a captain, I commanded 2 units, totaling 200 men. Below me were the lieutenants. Zhao Yu had been one of them, leading the 1st unit. To my surprise, Qin Mu was incredibly polite. He didn't treat me like a subordinate at all. I realized why almost immediately. "Commander, do you know why the general summoned me?" I asked quietly as we walked. Qin Mu smiled and shook his head. "You'll know once you're inside." Don't worry, it shouldn't be anything bad. You just started today? By procedure, you should have reported to the general first. He looked at me, his eyes lingering on my calm expression. I didn't look like the man who had just broken Zhao Yu's legs. I realized then that my detour to the barracks hadn't been an accident. Someone had guided me there first, setting the stage for the confrontation. A soldier stepped out of the massive main tent. Captain Xiao, the general will see you now. I nodded, keeping my posture steady, and walked inside. A middle-aged general sat behind a heavy desk. Greetings, General, I said, cupping my fists in a formal military salute. In the army, rank was everything. Even if you had a powerful family, you showed respect to your superior or you faced execution. That was exactly why I had been able to trash Zhao Yu so easily. He had broken the fundamental law of the camp by defying me. No need for such formality, Li Wenzhong said with a warm laugh. He stood up and personally poured me a cup of tea. Sit. I just wanted to meet you. He acted like there wasn't a drop of military hierarchy between us. We're both from the 5 noble houses. We're family. Actually, my family owes a lot to the House of Anon. He explained how, 200 years ago, his ancestors served as a vanguard for the Marquis of Anon. That military merit had earned the Li family their own Marquis title. Though it wasn't a hereditary rank, it got them into the inner circle of the nobility. If you don't mind, Li Wenzhong said, watching me closely, you can call me Uncle. Uncle Li, I replied without a second of hesitation. I smiled, but my mind was working at lightning speed. I remembered the files my uncle, Xia Qian, had given me. The Li family had been fading for generations, nearly disappearing from history. But Li Wenzhong had changed that. He had risen through the ranks of the Imperial Guards with impossible speed. There was only one explanation. He was the Emperor's man. You don't get handed the keys to the capital's defense unless the Emperor trusts you completely. His kindness toward me confirmed a theory I'd been forming. My status as the prince consort was even more powerful than I thought. If the imperial family was a household, the guards were the domestic servants. As the future son-in-law, I was practically half owner of the place. Until the emperor gave a direct order to crush me, these men were going to treat me like royalty. I relaxed into the conversation, playing the role of the respectful but confident nephew. By the time I finished my tea, we were laughing like old friends. When I stepped out of the tent, a smirk played on my lips. This start was better than I'd hoped. I could seize much more power here than I originally planned. I returned to my own camp, where Xia Qian hurried toward me. Young master, did General Li give you a hard time? Use my rank in the camp, uncle, I said, waving him off. And no, we had a very pleasant chat. I gathered the 3 experts my family had sent with me, Xia Hui, Xia Xiao, and Xia Kong. They were battle-hardened veterans. Xia Hui, in particular, was at the 7th rank essence refining realm. In any other unit, he'd be a captain or even a commander. As we were discussing our next move, a voice called out from outside the tent. Lieutenant Qian Nan requests an audience with the captain. I allowed him in. Qian Nan entered and immediately dropped to one knee, offering his absolute loyalty. It was clear he had already heard what happened to Zhao Yu. He didn't want to be next. Qian Nan's back was soaked with cold sweat. I watched him from across the desk, saying nothing. The silence stretched until he started to tremble. He had every reason to be terrified. Zhao Yu had approached him just yesterday, suggesting they team up to give me, the new captain, a warm welcome. Luckily for Qian Nan, he had been out patrolling the streets this morning and missed the confrontation. If he had been there, he knew he'd be lying in the dirt next to Zhao Yu, stripped of his rank and pride. Stand up, I said finally. My voice was calm, but the authority in it felt heavy. Thank you, General. Qian Nan gasped, his shoulders dropping as the pressure vanished. He looked at me with a mix of awe and fear. I could see what he was thinking. He had dealt with high-ranking commanders before, but the aura I was projecting felt even more oppressive. This was the breeding of the Marquis of Andong's lineage. I wasn't just a soldier, I was a predator. How was the patrol? I asked. All is well, sir, he replied quickly. We caught a thief mid-act and handed him over to the Ministry of Justice. I spent the next hour grilling him on the specifics of the Yulin Guards. I already knew the broad strokes, but I needed the gritty details, the politics, the hidden routines, and the recent rumors. The capital has been restless lately, Qiannan noted, leaning in slightly. Spies from the Great Qing Empire are starting to surface. We've been ordered to assist the lantern bearers in rooting them out. The lantern bearers. I nodded slowly, processing that. In the Great Wu Dynasty, they were a unique entity. They didn't report to the cabinet or the six ministries. They were an independent organization that answered only to the emperor. They were the shadows in the dark, much like the secret police from the history books of my old world. It made sense. The imperial guards were powerful, but in times of peace, the emperor didn't use us for finesse. If there was a crime or a spy, he called the lantern bearers. If there was a trial, it went to the Ministry of Justice. We were the muscle used for the final blow, the ones who broke down doors and dragged families off to execution after the verdict was already decided. By noon, I decided it was time to solidify my social standing. I invited my colleagues and subordinates to the Tongfu restaurant for a banquet. I expected a decent turnout, but the response was overwhelming. Anyone who wasn't on active duty showed up. Even General Li Wenzhong and Commander Qin Mu made an appearance. The atmosphere in the room shifted the moment they walked in. My fellow officers weren't fools. They knew exactly what this meant. If the top brass was showing up to a junior captain's lunch, my backing was untouchable. They spent the rest of the afternoon competing to toast me, their respect bordering on worship. While I was enjoying my wine, the Marquis of Jinwu's estate was in total chaos. "Young master, what happened to you?" The guards at the Marquis's gate shouted in horror as they saw Zhao Yu being carried back by his retainers. He was a gruesome sight. His arms hung limp and broken at his sides, and his back was a shredded mess of blood and raw meat. He was unconscious, his breathing shallow. If he hadn't been a martial artist with a strengthened physique, the 100 strikes would have killed him twice over. The mansion erupted. Servants ran in every direction. Someone was dispatched to the East City to fetch the best doctor from the Xuanji clinic. My son, my poor son, Lady Zhao, the Marquis's wife, burst into the room and wailed at the sight of him. She turned her tear-streaked face toward the retainers, her eyes burning with rage. Who did this? Who would dare treat the house of Jinwu with such cruelty? The retainers knelt, trembling, and recounted everything that happened at the camp. He broke his arms and then gave him 100 strikes? Over a minor disagreement. Lady Zhao hissed. We are fellow nobles. How could he be so heartless? My husband must memorialize the emperor. This Xia boy must pay. Enough, a stern voice interrupted. Marquis Zhao Yu walked into the room, his face tight with displeasure. Husband, look at him. Lady Zhao cried, grabbing his sleeve. That little brat tried to ruin our son. He's been expelled from the guards. Zhao Yu looked at his broken son, his eyes narrowing. But he didn't explode with rage. He stayed cold. He brought this on himself, the Marquis said flatly. I brought him into my study yesterday and explained the situation. I told him specifically not to provoke the Xia boy. Xia Chun is his direct superior now. Crushing a subordinate is easy work for someone in that position. I told him I would find him a better post in a few months, but the fool couldn't wait. He looked at his son with genuine disappointment. Compared to his two older brothers, Zhao Yu was a disaster, lacking both brains and restraint. It was the only reason a 20-year-old noble was still stuck as a lowly lieutenant. But we are on the same side, Lady Zhao argued. Even if there was a conflict, he should have handled it privately. If Yuer wasn't at the 8th rank, those strikes would have ended him. The Marquis's eyes flashed with a momentary spark of violence, but he suppressed it. Military matters aren't like tea parties, he said. The boy arrived on his first day, and my son tried to humiliate him in front of his troops. If Xia Chen didn't make an example of him, he would have lost the unit forever. From the moment that idiot son of yours started a riot, there was no way for this to end quietly. Zhao Yu understood power. He had led men before. He was disappointed in the lack of craft. If it were him, he wouldn't have challenged a superior openly on day one. He would have waited, smiled, and tripped him from the shadows later. So we just let it go? Lady Zhao demanded. He doesn't even have the legal authority to expel a commissioned officer. He doesn't, the Marquis admitted. But your son was stupid enough to provide him with a list of crimes that would get him expelled anyway once the report reached the top. For now, stay quiet. Do not send anyone after him. He leaned in, his gaze turning deadly serious. Xiaqin's situation is unique. The emperor himself is likely watching him right now. If you move against him, you're moving against the throne's interests. Do you understand? Lady Zhao looked away, her face pale and unwilling, but she finally nodded. The storm was brewing, but for now, they had to hide in the cellar. The Marquis of Wuzhen let out a long, heavy sigh as he watched his wife leave. He couldn't help but think about his sons. His two eldest boys had inherited his intellect, but this youngest one? It seemed the boy had inherited his mother's lack of sense instead. He hadn't picked up a single shred of the Marquis's tactical mind. Meanwhile, in the tranquil back garden of the Yaoguang princess's estate, a beautiful figure stood by the pond. The water was still, reflecting the lush green lotus leaves and the delicate pink blossoms that swayed like shy dancers. Golden fish darted through the water, sending tiny ripples across the surface. It was a scene straight out of a painting, peaceful and perfect. That peace was shattered by the hurried footsteps of a girl in yellow robes. "Princess, news just came in about Xiaqin. Do you want to hear it?" The second princess didn't turn around. She kept her eyes on the lotus flowers. "He went to take his post, didn't he?" The girl, Li Wei, gasped in surprise. She was one of the princess's personal maids and had been following the news from the Marquis of Andong's estate closely. "How did you know?" "I haven't even said anything yet." "It isn't hard to guess," the princess said, her voice cool and steady. "Aside from the rumors about his wasted talent, he's been quiet. The Marquis's estate has been pulling strings to find him a position lately, specifically in the Imperial Guard. It was only a matter of time." "Princess, you're amazing," Li Wei praised sincerely. She wondered why she could never figure things out like that. The princess shook her head slightly. "You should spend more time learning from Ziyu. Read more books. There is wisdom to be found in them." Li Wei made a face. "Reading makes me too sleepy. Ziyu likes it, but I prefer good food. Food is much better." She giggled and leaned closer to the princess, dropping her voice to a whisper. "But really, don't you want to hear about him? He is your future husband, after all." Li Wei's face flushed a bit as she said it. According to the rules, when the princess married, her personal maids would also serve the husband. "I'm not interested," the princess replied. She saw the look on Li Wei's face and felt a spark of amusement, but she truly wasn't curious about the man she was destined to marry. "Oh, come on. I'm going to tell you anyway," Li Wei pouted. She grabbed the princess's arm and started recounting everything that had happened when Xiaqin arrived at the Imperial Guard barracks. As Li Wei spoke, the princess's calm expression finally shifted. Her eyes flickered with genuine surprise. "He broke both of Zhao Yu's arms in a single move?" "Yes. They said he was terrifying." Li Wei nodded vigorously. "He stood there alone against an entire battalion, and not a single soul dared to move. They were all paralyzed with fear." "Did he use his family guards?" the princess asked. "No, he did it himself." The princess fell silent, her mind racing. Li Wei noticed the change in her mistress's demeanor. She wasn't slow, just playful. She knew something was up. "Princess, is something wrong?" "The Marquis of Andong has a rule that has stood for 600 years, the princess explained slowly. "No descendant of the house can join the military unless they reach the 8th rank essence refining realm. The fact that Xiaqin was allowed out means he reached that level. But he was supposed to be a martial waste." She paused, her brow furrowing. "I thought perhaps the Marquis had used expensive spirit medicines to force his cultivation up to the 8th rank. But to overwhelm Zhao Yu like that, his actual combat power must be at the 7th rank spirit refining realm. You can buy a realm with medicine, but you can't buy that kind of raw power. Maybe he ate some kind of miracle pill," Li Wei suggested, her eyes bright. "There is no such pill," the princess muttered. "Xia family, have you been hiding your hand this whole time?" She realized that every rumor about Xiaqin being a waste had originated from within the Xia family itself. Nobody on the outside had actually met him. It was a cover. But why? Why hide a genius? The Xia family already had several top-tier talents in this generation. One more wouldn't change their status enough to justify such a deep deception. "Keep watching him," the princess commanded. "Report everything to me." She looked over and saw Li Wei had already pulled a stick of candied haws from somewhere and was happily licking the sugar. The princess sighed and shook her head with a smile. "I'm on it," Li Wei chirped. She pulled another stick of candied haws from her sleeve and held it out. Princess, want one? The food outside the palace is so much better than what we get inside. I don't want it. Just one. I bought a lot. Li Wei shoved the stick into the princess's hand. 15 minutes later, the cold and elegant second princess was walking through her garden, licking a stick of candied haws while she looked at the flowers. A small, rare smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. It really was quite sweet. By that afternoon, I found myself with nothing urgent to do. I decided to make the most of the downtime. I called both battalions under my command together to learn their names and faces. By the time the sun started to set, I knew all 200 of them. It seemed like a small task, but in leadership, it was everything. I made a few changes to the structure. I appointed my guard, Xia Hui, to temporarily lead the 1st Battalion. Xia Hui was at the 7th rank, and I'd learned he used to be a commander in the border army, leading over 1,000 men. Managing 100 palace guards was child's play for him. Technically, I didn't have the authority to make that appointment official, but when I sent the paperwork to Commander Li Wenzhong, he approved it without a second thought. He was happy to do me a favor. Besides, Xiaohui was only staying as long as I was. If I left the Imperial Guard, he was coming with me. That evening, I headed home. I was supposed to be on night patrol, but it turned out my units had finished their rotation 2 days early. Since I couldn't exactly go out to the taverns and listen to music without causing a stir, I stayed in my room. A knock sounded at the door. Young master, it was Xia Qian. Come in, I said. He entered, carrying a thick stack of documents. Here is the information you requested regarding the Great Qin secret agents. These were internal files from the Feather Forest Guard. As a captain, I finally had the clearance to see them. The capital had been unstable for the past month. The unrest had reached the emperor's ears, sending him into a rage. The hidden dragon guards had been mobilized, and arrests were happening all over the city. People were terrified. I flipped open the first folder, and my heart skipped a beat as I saw the lead case. The defense maps for the Northwest Army had been stolen. Now I understood why the storm was hitting so hard. The Great Wu border meets the kingdoms of Qing and Feng in the northwest. 20,000 soldiers were stationed there, guarding our frontier. Now, the defense maps for that entire region had been stolen. This was a catastrophe. It explained why the emperor was livid and why he'd unleashed the hidden dragon guards to tear the capital apart. I stared at the files, whispering to myself. Someone had walked right into the Ministry of War and taken those maps without alerting a single soul. There had to be an inside man. For decades, Great Wu had been at odds with Qing and Feng. We hadn't seen a massive war since the Battle of Huayang 36 years ago, just small border skirmishes. But this theft changed everything. After all these years, Great Feng had likely recovered its strength, and they were growing closer to Great Qing. They were forming an alliance to take us down. I kept reading. The file said a low-level clerk in the Ministry of War stole the maps and handed them to a blacksmith in the western district of the capital. By the time the investigators reached them, both men had already committed suicide. The trail went cold right there. It had been 6 or 7 days. Those maps were long gone, likely already across the border and sitting on a general's desk in the Qing capital. Something felt wrong. The clerk lived near the inner city, while the blacksmith worked on the far edge of the west city. They were at least 10 miles apart. There was no way that clerk hand-delivered those maps. The capital has a strict curfew at night. Unless you have a special pass, no one moves. The maps were stolen at night. I lay back on my bed, piecing it together. Who can walk the streets at night? Only the Imperial Guard and the hidden dragon agents. That meant one or both of these organizations had been compromised. I was looking at a massive conspiracy, but my information was too limited. These files were incomplete. The hidden dragon agents were professionals. They definitely knew more, but they wouldn't share their secrets with a captain of the Feather Forest Guard. To them, we were just muscle used for raids, not investigators. The next morning, I arrived early at the guard headquarters. Boss. Morning. It was Li Shi, the man who had led me to the training grounds the day before. He ran toward me, a wide, eager grin stretching across his face. He looked 20 but had the wrinkles of a 40-year-old. He held up a paper bag. Have some buns, boss. I got these from the dog-ignored shop. Best buns in the city. Try one. I narrowed my eyes at him. Yesterday, This kid had led me straight into a confrontation with the Marquis of Jinwoo's son. I wasn't sure if he was trying to set me up or just liked watching the world burn. "They're amazing, boss. I swear," Li Shi said, acting like a loyal hound, nearly shoving the bag into my hands. The aroma was incredible. I took a bite. The crust was thin, and the filling was rich. I could see why the nobles loved this place. "The buns are good," I said casually, "but the name is terrible. Dogs are our friends. If a dog won't even look at these, I'd worry they were filled with dog meat." Li Shi's expression flickered. He wasn't stupid. He realized I'd seen right through his games from yesterday. I'd just thrashed a Marquis's son. He knew I wasn't someone to mess with. If I decided to make his life miserable, he was finished. "The buns are great," I repeated, walking past him. "Bring me a bag every morning from now on." Li Shi froze. Then his face lit up with relief. "You got it, boss. Breakfast is on me every day," he shouted after me. I shook my head as I entered the command tent. If people heard him shouting like that, they'd think he was trying to court me. Around noon, Li Shi popped up again. That same wrinkled, comical grin was back on his face. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Boss, after we finish our shift tonight, I want to take you somewhere fun." He had a suggestive look in his eye. He was only a low-level squad leader, but he had guts, calling me boss, to close the distance between our ranks. I looked at him skeptically. I knew exactly what he meant. In this world, entertainment was scarce. At night, there were only 3 things to do: drink wine, listen to music, and look at pretty girls. And usually, after you looked at the girls, you did a lot more than just look. The high-end houses in the capital were legendary. The women were stunning, but the prices were even more breathtaking. A single night in one of those places could cost a regular family half a year's income. And that was just for the basic service. If you wanted to spend the night with a top-tier flower queen, money alone wasn't enough. You needed status, talent, and luck. Because of that, the mid-range entertainment houses, the Gulen, were always packed. They were cheaper, offered high value, and even commoners could afford a visit if they saved up. I wasn't a saint. I was actually quite curious about these places. I told myself that even a gentleman needs to share joy with the people every now and then. It was a solid philosophy. I patted Li Shi on the shoulder and told him he had a bright future. He looked thrilled and hurried off to make the arrangements. Being a leader had its perks. I didn't have to worry about the bill or the logistics. I just had to show up. I treated it like a deep academic study. I wanted to see just how intense the cultural collision between our 2 worlds could be. The rest of the day was quiet. In the afternoon, I took my men out for a patrol through the capital. The city was incredibly prosperous. Xia Qian followed behind me, his eyes darting everywhere, overwhelmed by the sights. We passed the Yingguang princess's mansion at one point. I looked at the 2 massive stone lions guarding the gate, weathered by time, but still imposing. I took one look and kept moving. I also made sure to memorize the locations of all the major brothels. I wasn't doing it for my own pleasure, of course. I was a man of integrity. I was the gentleman who avoids lust. When night fell, the gentleman who avoids lust followed Li Shi out of the Yulin Guard headquarters. Xia Qian tagged along, looking nervous as we ducked into a narrow alleyway. As we walked, I realized something was wrong. This wasn't the way to the red light districts I'd mapped out earlier. We were heading in the complete opposite direction. Li Shi noticed my confusion and grinned. His face wrinkled up like a dried plum. He told me he knew I'd been raised strictly in the Marquis' estate, focused entirely on cultivation before I reached the 8th rank. He assumed I'd never been allowed out at night. He wanted to give me a proper introduction to the capital's night culture. Behind us, Xia Qian's face turned bright red. He'd never been to a place like this either, but he'd heard the servants in the kitchen whispering. They called these places the most wonderful spots on earth. "We aren't going to Suyu Street," I asked calmly. I was on high alert. Part of me wondered if this was a trap. Maybe the Zhao family was planning to ambush me in a dark alley to get revenge for their son. Li Shi saw my hesitation and lowered his voice to a whisper. He explained that Suyu Street was too low-class for someone like me. The high-end brothels were better, but they were too public. Since my engagement to the second princess was common knowledge, being spotted there would ruin my reputation. Instead, he was taking me to a private courtyard called Qingya Shaoju. It was a place where you could listen to music, watch dances, and stay the night. Most importantly, everyone wore masks. The privacy was top-notch. I looked at Li Shi with a new sense of respect. The kid was actually a genius. In this dynasty, visiting these houses wasn't considered a scandal. Scholars and poets had turned it into a refined pursuit. If a young man reached adulthood without visiting a house of joy, he was looked down upon by his peers. I had to laugh. The scholars in this world were something else. They were so good at making vice look like virtue. I remembered that in the original timeline, the future empress eventually banned the entire industry. The players back then were so upset they talked about starting a revolution just to bring the brothels back. The empress ended that talk by personally executing the ringleaders. I thought you were taking me to the Jiafangxi, I joked. Li Shi laughed nervously. He told me he couldn't possibly afford the Imperial Music Bureau. Just walking through the door cost 5 taels of silver. Drinks and music were extra, and spending the night with a girl would cost at least 10 taels. He looked at the sky with a face full of longing. He'd heard the women there were incredible, mostly the wives and daughters of disgraced officials. There was a certain thrill to that kind of status that money couldn't buy. I stayed quiet as we walked, listening to Li Shi explain the rules of the game. These places weren't just about the physical stuff. They focused on poetry, music, and art to keep things elegant. The more refined the entertainment, the more popular the house. But we all knew the core business was what happened after the music stopped. Finally, we turned into a hidden alley and stopped in front of a secluded, private courtyard. The courtyard blended into the surrounding residential buildings perfectly. A simple sign hung by the door with 4 words, "Qingya's small stay." To a passerby, it looked like nothing more than a private home. I remembered reading about the great ancestor in the history books. When he was young, his colleagues tried to drag him to brothels, but he refused every time. He believed a young man should sharpen his spirit, not waste his life on women. Because of that discipline, his martial arts surpassed everyone else's. I looked at the sign again. Qingya's small stay. It was a classy name, but we all knew what kind of spiritual exchange happened behind those doors. Li Shi knocked while whispering the details to me. The owner, a woman named Qingya, was famous among the city's scholars. Even high-ranking officials were known to frequent this place. You paid an entrance fee and a fee for drinks, but the rest was up to fate. Whether you stayed the night depended entirely on whether your talent caught Qingya's eye. If you failed, you had to settle for one of the maids. I had to hand it to her. This woman had a brilliant head for business. She had turned herself into a high-end brand. By making the experience about mutual attraction rather than just money, she separated herself from every other brothel in the city. It was pure psychological warfare. Scholars are arrogant. They always think they're better than the next guy. The more exclusive she made it, the more they craved it. If they didn't get picked the first time, they'd come back again and again. It was a perfect loop for repeat business. I was genuinely curious to see this Qingya for myself. A small head peeked out from behind the door. It was a young maid with round cheeks and a cute face. Li Shi handed over our invitations. I adjusted the mask he had prepared for me earlier. As soon as we stepped inside, the heavy scent of rouge hit my nose. The courtyard was already crowded with about 30 men, all dressed in scholars' robes. They glanced at us briefly before returning to their drinks. I found a quiet spot and sat down. The place was alive. Dancers moved gracefully in the center of the yard while guests played drinking games. I watched the dancers closely. Their clothes were thin, but they didn't look cheap or vulgar. They had the refined aura of daughters from noble families. That was the draw. Everything here felt elegant. Suddenly, the sound of a zither cut through the noise. It was beautiful. The crowd grew restless. Li Shi leaned in and told me that Qingya was a master of the arts, and her zither skills were said to rival the professionals at the Imperial Music Bureau. I looked toward the main house. A slender silhouette appeared behind a silk screen, flickering in the candlelight. "Gentlemen, thank you for waiting," a cold, melodic voice said. A woman stepped out from behind the screen. Even with everyone wearing masks, I could feel the room brighten. She looked like a perfect lady of a high household. I smiled to myself. She was playing the noble girl card to perfection. The contrast was the whole point. "Lady Qingya, you joke," a man in the front row shouted. "The night is young. We haven't waited long at all." He was dressed in expensive silks and staring at her with burning eyes. Another man joined in, showering her with compliments. Qingya laughed softly, covering half her face with a silk handkerchief. She looked shy and delicate, the kind of woman that made men want to protect her. She completely outshone every other girl in the courtyard. The atmosphere hit a peak as everyone started competing for her attention. Qingya scanned the room, her eyes lingering on each masked face. When her gaze met mine, she paused. It felt like she was trying to peer through the mask to see who I really was. The other guests noticed her hesitation. They all turned to look at me. Even though I was just sitting there quietly sipping wine, my temperament stood out. They probably thought I was some hidden prince or a high-ranking noble. I didn't care. Why don't we start with a game of Fei Hua Ling? Qingya suggested. It was a classic poetry game. Everyone nodded, confident in their own skills. I played along for a few rounds, giving just enough correct answers to stay in the game without drawing too much attention. My family was a line of generals, but they had forced me to study the basics since I was a child. I knew enough to get by. As the night went on, the games changed. We did everything from rhythmic challenges to composing original verses. The energy in the yard was electric. Qingya was a master at pacing the night, pushing the excitement higher with every hour. A few scholars actually performed quite well, producing poems that were impressive even to me. Finally, Qingya stood up and gave a graceful bow. I'm afraid I'm feeling a bit tired. Please, continue to enjoy yourselves. She turned and walked away, leaving a thick silence behind her. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. The games were over. Now, we would find out who she had chosen to stay the night. The scholars who had performed well earlier stood up, their eyes brimming with confidence. They preened themselves, fully convinced they would be the ones chosen to stay the night. Inside the courtyard, most people had lost interest in the games. A small group, knowing they stood no chance with Qingya, began eyeing the serving maids instead. Boss, should we pick a maid? Or are we heading back for the night? Li Shi whispered. It was getting late, close to the city's curfew. The three of us hadn't done anything to stand out, and Qingya hadn't spared us a second glance all evening. That was why Li Shi asked. Behind me, Xia Qian looked flushed and awkward. It was his first time in a place like this, and he clearly didn't know what to do with his hands. Let's wait a bit longer, I said calmly. Li Shi fell silent, looking at me with a hint of suspicion. By all accounts, this should have been my first time in such a place too. Yet, I was acting like a seasoned regular, composed, relaxed, and entirely unfazed. I didn't look like a rookie at all. Behind a folding screen in the inner chambers, steam rose from a wooden tub. Qingya stepped into the hot water, her delicate skin meeting the surface littered with flower petals. Her damp hair hung over her shoulders, and her exquisite face carried a trace of melancholy. Gone was the playful smile she wore outside. Here, she looked like a sacred goddess who had descended from the heavens. If I had seen her then, I probably would have thought she was perfect for roleplay. A maid poured more hot water into the tub. Miss, are you keeping anyone tonight? Qingya's residence offered overnight stays, but she only chose someone once or twice a week. The rarity only made people more desperate. A wealthy merchant had once offered 1,000 silver taels for a single night, and she had turned him down without blinking. Qingya frowned. Then her eyes suddenly lit up. Go and invite the gentleman in the white mask. The one with the extraordinary temperament. He stays tonight. The maid froze. Him? He was unremarkable tonight. There were several scholars who performed much better. If we pick him, the others will be furious. It might ruin your reputation for fairness. He's the one, Qingya said, a breathtaking smile playing on her lips. The trouble we've been facing lately. He might be the key to breaking the deadlock. His identity is very special. The maid looked surprised. She was a beauty in her own right, but she paled in comparison to her mistress. That's Xia Chun, Qingya continued, the eldest son of the Marquis of Anong. He's the one who just got engaged to the second princess. He's a captain in the Imperial Guard now, and I heard he kicked the son of the Marquis of martial prowess out of the guards yesterday. He's already making his mark. The maid, Xiao Lian, gasped. She knew her mistress possessed a unique vision that could see through masks. I understand. I'll go get him. As Xiao Lian left, Qingya stood up from the tub. Water droplets rolled down her perfect body, glistening in the lamplight like crystals. It was a masterpiece of a silhouette, though there was no one there to admire it. Back in the courtyard, I was sipping wine when a young man in a white mask approached us. "Greetings, brother," he said with a smile. "My father is Li Gang, a secretary in the Ministry of Revenue. My name is Li Kuei, courtesy named Deshan." He looked like a scholar and fanned himself with a folding fan, trying to look sophisticated. When I heard the name Li Kuei, my lip twitched. I half expected him to rip off the mask, reveal a massive beard, and start calling me brother like the brute from the legends. "Do you have any brothers?" I couldn't help but ask. He looked confused. "Why do you ask? I'm an only child." "Just curious," I said. "My name is Yangshi. No courtesy name. Just call me by my name." I threw out a fake name immediately. When you're out causing trouble or having fun, you never use your real identity. That was common sense. "Ah, Brother Yang." Li Kuei's mind started racing. He was trying to figure out which Yang family in the capital I belonged to. He saw I wasn't volunteering more info, so he didn't dare push too hard. He wondered if I was related to Elder Yang from the Grand Secretariat, though that family was known for being incredibly strict. He didn't know I didn't care about his father's rank. A mid-level official wasn't enough to make me blink. Seeing my lack of enthusiasm, Li Kuei tried a different angle. "Brother Yang, it's unlikely Qingya will choose anyone tonight. How about we head over to Siyu Street? I know a brothel there with the most beautiful girls you've ever seen. My treat." He slapped his chest, acting like we were old friends. He figured if I was from a big family, this was the best way to build a connection. Behind me, Li Shi glared at the back of Li Kuei's head. He was furious. He had brought me here to impress me, and now this random guy was trying to poach his boss and take me to another club? It felt like a direct insult to his planning skills. Just as Li Kuei was feeling confident, the door to the inner chambers opened. Xiao Lian stepped out. The crowd erupted. Even if they couldn't stay with Qingya, spending a night with her top maid was a massive win. Li Kuei's eyes lit up too, his offer to me momentarily forgotten. Li Kuei stared blankly at Xiao Lian. Even as a maid, her beauty rivaled the top courtesans of any ordinary brothel. I could see the gears turning in his head. He was clearly thinking that if he could spend the night with her, this trip wouldn't be a waste. Xiao Lian gave a polite greeting to the crowd. Then, she started walking straight toward us. Li Kuei's heart began to thud against his ribs. He stood taller, convinced he was the chosen one. He probably thought his distinguished temperament had won her over, or maybe she knew his father was a high-ranking official in the Ministry of Revenue. He was already mentally preparing for a night of pleasure. Then, Xiao Lian walked right past him. She stopped in front of me. "Young master, my lady requests your presence," she said softly. She gave me a deep bow. As she bent over, her white silk dress clung to her curves, accentuating a perfect, graceful figure. The entire room went silent. I could hear the heavy, ragged breathing of the men around us. The crowd was stunned. Qingya was actually keeping someone for the night, and it was this guy? They remembered me now. Qingya had lingered on me for a second earlier, but I hadn't done anything impressive during the games. I had stayed quiet and unremarkable. Several scholars who had performed well tonight stood up immediately, their faces flushed with indignation. They weren't about to let this opportunity slide without a fight. "Miss Xiao Lian, this isn't fair," one shouted. This man was mediocre all night. Li Kuei was frozen like a statue next to me. He had just finished telling me it was impossible for anyone to stay the night. He had been ready to take me to a cheap brothel to show me a good time. And now, I was the one heading into the inner chambers. Did I get picked just because I had a slightly better vibe than him? The scene was bordering on a riot. Xiao Lian took a deep breath and maintained her professional smile. "Gentlemen, the decision of who stays in the Qingya Pavilion rests solely with my lady. Her mind is made up. Please, return another day." She turned back to me. "This way, young master." I stood up and looked at Xia Qian and Li Shi. "You two head back first." Xia Qian looked like he wanted to argue, but Li Shi grabbed his arm, grinning ear to ear. "Got it, boss. Just make sure you're up early tomorrow. We have a mission with the lantern bearers." He leaned in and whispered it in my ear, giving me a look that said he knew exactly what kind of mission I was about to embark on tonight. I ignored him and started to follow Xiao Lian. As I passed the dazed Li Kuei, he grabbed my sleeve. His eyes were wide with desperation. Brother Yang, wait. What's the secret? How did you get in? He stopped himself before saying something about back doors, but the envy was dripping off him. I thought about it for a second, then patted his shoulder. Maybe I'm just handsomer than everyone else, I said quietly. I didn't wait for his reaction. I walked away, leaving them with nothing but the sight of my back. A few guys tried to follow me, but two massive guards stepped out from the shadows of the courtyard. The scholars took one look at those hulking frames and immediately sat back down. They were men of letters, after all. They knew when to be flexible. Xiao Lian led me deeper into the estate. The place was surprisingly massive. I kept my eyes open, memorizing the layout as we walked. Finally, we reached a room in the inner courtyard. Xiao Lian stopped and signaled for me to go in alone. I hesitated for a heartbeat, looking at the graceful silhouette cast against the paper door. Then, I pushed it open. The scent hit me instantly. It was a mix of fresh flowers and something more intimate, the natural fragrance of a woman. Inside, Qingyao was sitting at her dressing table. She didn't look at me. She was focused on her reflection in the bronze mirror. Her hair was damp, droplets of water clinging to the strands like tiny crystals. She wiped them away with a silk handkerchief, her movements as light as a breeze touching a petal. Then she picked up a wooden comb, drawing it through her dark hair from root to tip. Each stroke released a faint, elegant aroma. She wore only her inner robes, yet she was fully covered, projecting an air of refined modesty that only made the situation feel more intense. I stood there in silence, watching her. I wasn't going to ruin the view. You certainly have a lot of patience, young master, she said. Her voice was cool and clear. She turned around, revealing a face that could truly topple empires. It would be rude to ruin such a beautiful scene. I replied with a light smile, playing the part of the refined noble. She tilted her head, her eyes tracing my mask. You are already in my private room. Are you still refusing to take off that mask? There was a hint of resentment in her tone, a playful tug at the heartstrings. She stood up and began walking toward me. I thought keeping it on might make things more interesting, I said. She blinked, momentarily confused by my implication. Then, being sharp-witted, she realized I was talking about what would happen later tonight. A flash of coldness crossed her eyes. Typical man, she was likely thinking. Just another one after my body. I sat down at the table and glanced at her figure. She was stunning. If we were in a cultivation novel, those curves would be enough to trigger a breakthrough. The moon is beautiful, and the night is long, I said, reaching for the ties of my mask. If you really want to see, it's only fair we be honest with each other. I pulled the mask away. My real face was revealed, sharp features, deep and bright eyes, and a high bridge to my nose. I let a faint, mysterious smile play on my lips. In the flickering candlelight, my skin looked as pale and smooth as jade. I watched her reaction, waiting to see what the famous Qingyao would do next. Even though Qingyao had seen my face once before through her special technique, it had only been a hurried glimpse. Now that we were inches apart, her gaze froze. She tried to look away naturally, but she couldn't. I could see the genuine shock in her eyes. She was clearly impressed. In her mind, she was probably ranking me against every man she'd ever met. I caught a flicker of a blush on her cheeks as she quickly composed herself. She realized she was staring and cleared her throat, regaining her calm, elegant demeanor. Your appearance is truly extraordinary, young master, she said with a smile. I believe you could easily compete for the title of the capital's #1 handsome man. I knew what she was talking about. Some bored socialites in the capital had created a list of the 4 most beautiful women and the 4 most handsome men. It was a bit tacky, but the people on that list were famous for having looks that didn't seem to belong to the mortal world. So, Lady Qingyao has met these famous handsome men? I asked. I poured myself a cup of tea, making myself right at home. I wasn't going to act like a nervous guest in my own play. I've had the honor of meeting one, she said, moving closer. A wave of her perfume hit me as she sat down beside me. But compared to you, he falls a bit short. She wasn't just flattering me. I could tell she meant it. Based on the information she likely had, I was only 17. In a year or two, when I reached full adulthood, my features would only become more refined. I had to suppress a laugh. I was basically becoming the male version of a legendary beauty. I had spent 17 years hidden away in the Marquis's estate, and now that I had finally stepped out, I was already turning heads. It was ironic. My pseudonym was Yang, and I was starting to feel like a character from an old poem about a beauty hidden in a palace. "What are you thinking about?" Qingya asked, noticing my eyes drifting. "Nothing," I said, straightening my posture. She giggled, probably thinking I was a nervous kid experiencing a brothel for the first time. "Young master, the night is long. Drinking tea is so boring. We have fine wine here." She poured me a cup, her bright eyes locked onto mine. "I'm curious," I said, trying to dig for information. "How beautiful are these four legendary women you mentioned?" She looked surprised. "You don't know? Usually, men are obsessed with that list." She leaned in, her professional charm taking over. "The four beauties are all from incredible backgrounds. Unlike the men's list, theirs is undisputed. One is the disciple of the current heavenly master. Another is the holy daughter of the Tianlong Temple. The other two are from the secular world. One is the daughter of Prime Minister Lin Hanpu, and the last is the emperor's second daughter, Princess Yaoguang." When she mentioned the princess, she paused, watching my reaction closely. "I heard Princess Yaoguang was recently betrothed to the son of the Marquis of Anong," she added. I kept my face like stone. Not a single muscle twitched. I acted as if that Marquis's son was a total stranger to me. "People from the Heavenly Master's Mansion and Tianlong Temple are on the list?" I asked, shifting the focus. Those were the two pillars of Taoism and Buddhism in the Great Wu Dynasty. Their leaders were the strongest cultivators in the world, and they rarely involved themselves in worldly affairs. "They didn't choose to be," Qingya explained softly. "But people couldn't help but put them at the top anyway." "And how do you compare to them, Lady Qingya?" I asked. She froze for a second, then shook her head with a self-deprecating laugh. "Please don't tease me. Whether it's status or beauty, I am worlds apart from them. I don't belong in the same breath as those four." She stood up slowly, her vibe changing instantly. "Young master, it's late. Do you really want to spend the whole night talking at this table?" She walked toward the bed and stepped onto the platform. The elegant, high-cold goddess disappeared. In her place was a seductive enchantress. Her eyes glowed with a predatory light, and the atmosphere in the room turned thick and heavy. I smiled and walked toward the bed, acting the part of the eager youth. "It seems you've lost your patience, Lady Qingya." "It's not my fault," she whispered, her voice dripping with mock resentment. "You were so busy talking, you didn't even try to play with me." I laughed and leaned in, reaching out as if to pull her into my arms. But as I moved, I felt a strange, rippling power wash over me. It was a sedative force, meant to put me into a deep sleep. It wasn't very strong. I could have easily shrugged it off, but I realized this was her move. I decided to see where this went. I let my eyes glaze over, my body went limp, and I collapsed onto the bed, pretending to be fast asleep. "Men really are all the same." A voice spat from the doorway. It was Xiao Lian, the maid. She walked in, looking disgusted. "He just got engaged, and he's already rushing to a place like this." Qingya stood up, her seductive act vanishing instantly. She was cold and dignified again. "I didn't expect him to come here either, but this is an opportunity. We can use him to feed information to the lantern bearers." She sighed, looking down at my unconscious body. "The lantern bearers have been investigating too closely lately. Our dark network in the capital is suffering heavy losses. If this continues, we're in trouble." "Those damn people from the Great Phone," Xiaolian hissed. "If we hadn't helped them years ago, Great Wu would have wiped them out. Now that they've recovered, they dare to backstab us? They stole the military maps and framed us for it." I lay there, perfectly still, listening to every word. This was much bigger than a night at a brothel. I had just stumbled into a nest of spies. The situation was getting worse for them by the day. Their peripheral members were being rounded up one by one. It was only a matter of time before the authorities reached the inner circle. To make matters worse, spies from the Great Feng's Inspection Bureau had leaked their identities to the lantern bearers. Their organization, the Huangqingxi, was bleeding out. "There must be a mole from the Inspection Bureau among us," Qingya said, her voice turning ice cold. "Otherwise, we wouldn't be in this mess. Our current identities aren't safe anymore. After tonight, we need to disappear and start over." Xiao Lian nodded, her face grim. She glanced back at me as I lay unconscious on the bed. Miss, what should we do with him? Should I use an illusion to plant some clues in his mind? Even if he finds them, will he actually investigate? He's just a captain in the Imperial Guard. Investigations are usually handled by the lantern bearers. Qingya stepped toward the bed. Men like him are ambitious. They enter the bureaucracy looking for glory. According to his files, he didn't join the guard just to slack off. We have to take the initiative and stop letting the inspection bureau lead us by the nose. She leaned over me. Her eyes began to ripple like water, glowing with a strange, mystical energy. I'll pull him into a dream. I'll influence him to visit the spring flower house tomorrow. He'll find the clues there and think he's a genius for discovering them. He won't realize he's just a blade in our hands. A small, smug smile touched her lips. She hated letting men into her room, and she'd never let one touch her. Her illusions were so perfect, so lifelike, that no one ever knew the difference between the dream and reality. Faint, crystalline light shimmered around her. 2 ghostly blue butterflies fluttered out from her pupils and dived toward my forehead. But the moment they entered my consciousness, Qingya's face went white. In her vision, a pair of massive eyes looked down at her. They were cold, ancient, and terrifying. Each eye had 2 pupils, the legendary double pupils, containing the ultimate secrets of the universe. To her, it felt like staring at a god. The blue butterflies shattered instantly. The illusion broke. Qingya gasped, her eyes wide with pure terror. She tried to scramble backward, but a large, powerful hand shot out and clamped around her slender wrist. Before she could scream, I yanked her down. She lost her balance and tumbled directly into my arms. I looked down at her, a playful smirk on my face. For a split second, she saw my pupils merge and shift, deep as a black hole. "Let go of my lady," Xiao Lian screamed. She was too late. My hand was already wrapped firmly around Qingya's throat. Xiao Lian stood frozen, her mind racing. How was I awake? I should have been lost in the dream. The air in the room changed. Qingya was soft and warm in my arms, a position that should have been intimate, but the tension was razor-sharp. I didn't realize the famous Lady Qingya was a powerful sorceress, I said, my voice smooth. Tell me, can you actually kill people in those dreams of yours? I used my other hand to tilt her chin up, forcing her to look at me. Her sapphire blue eyes were still glowing with fading magic. We were so close I could feel her breath on my skin. I watched as goosebumps broke out along her neck. Her face flushed a deep, panicked red. Xiao Lian surged forward, her aura exploding. She was a 7th-rank martial artist, her bloodlust radiating off her like heat. She looked like a cornered predator ready to spring. A sorceress and a 7th-rank warrior. I mused, my fingers tracing the line of Qingya's jaw. The Huangqingxi really is hiding some big players in this little brothel. Qingya tried to steady her breathing, though her skin felt like it was burning wherever I touched it. You were awake the whole time. You heard everything. But how? You drank the tea. You drank the wine. I put heavy sedatives in both. I shrugged. Maybe I'm just built different. You clearly didn't use enough. I didn't tell her that my system scanned everything that entered my body. Any toxin or drug was neutralized before it could even hit my bloodstream. I was effectively immune to poison. The courtyard is full of our people, Xiao Lian hissed. Her body tensed to strike. You'll never make it out. Be smart. Release her, or else. Or else what? I interrupted, looking her up and down. You're going to take me down? You're only 7th rank. Do you really think you're fast enough to stop me before I snap her neck? I leaned back, pulling Qingya tighter against me. Go ahead. Call the others. Maybe there's a 6th or 5th rank expert outside who can overpower me. But remember 2 things. First, those men are Huangqingxi agents, not your personal servants. If they see their high and mighty lady lying in bed with me like this, the rumors will ruin you. Second, it's past curfew. The lantern bearers and the Imperial Guard are patrolling right outside. If a fight breaks out here, how long do you think it'll take for the real experts to arrive? I laughed, feeling completely in control. I gave Qingya's cheek a mocking little pinch. I had sent my uncle and the others home because I knew I could handle this. In this city, at this hour, I held all the cards. I hadn't just stumbled into a spy nest. I had caught myself a very big fish. The room was silent, save for my laughter. I held the beauty tight in my arms, looking every bit like a villain who had just cornered two innocent maidens. Xiao Lian's face turned a deep shade of crimson, her teeth gritted in a silent fury she couldn't act upon. She knew I was right. If a fight broke out now, the capital's top experts would swarm this place like locusts. None of them would walk away free. Young master, Qingya said, her voice regaining its steady, calm rhythm. She turned her bright, captivating eyes toward me, staring straight into my soul. Since you already know who we are, why don't you let me go? We can sit down and talk like adults. She was realizing that I wasn't the martial waste described in the intelligence reports from the Marquis of Andong's estate. I had secrets. I was dangerous. Can't we talk right here on the bed? I asked playfully. I let my fingers trail lightly across the smooth skin of her back. I felt a wave of goosebumps erupt across her skin instantly. She stiffened, her body flushing a light pink as if she'd been hit by a bolt of electricity. It was a warning. I wanted her to understand that she was my prisoner, and prisoners don't get to dictate the terms of the conversation. Since you overheard us, I'll be honest, Qingya said, ignoring the shiver I'd sent through her. We didn't steal the military deployment maps. The Great Feng Inspectorate set us up. They used us as a shield to draw attention away from themselves. I tilted my head. And why should I believe you? I don't care who stole the maps. I know for a fact you're with the Huang Chengxi. You're clearly a high-ranking officer, too. Turning you in and wiping out this nest is a massive achievement on its own. Why should I go looking for a harder path? Qingya and Xiao Lian fell silent. They couldn't argue with that logic. To the court, capturing spies from either the Huang Chengxi or the Inspectorate was a win. However, I continued, watching their eyes light up with a sudden, desperate hope. If the Inspectorate has moles in your organization, I assume you have the same in theirs. Give me the locations of the Inspectorate's secret branches in the capital. Give me the evidence that they stole the maps. Do that, and I'll let you go. Their emotions were like a roller coaster, plummeting into darkness 1 second and soaring toward a lifeline the next. Qingya looked at me intensely. She saw a man who wasn't just handsome, but one possessed by a terrifying ambition. I knew that capturing a few spies was good, but it wasn't enough to get me where I needed to be. If the lantern bearers eventually found out the maps were elsewhere, my credit for this bust would be halved. But if I could dismantle the Inspectorate's entire network in the city, that would catch the Emperor's personal attention. I only had 5 years until the coup. Being a lowly 7th-rank captain wasn't going to cut it. I needed to rise, and I needed to do it fast. Why should I trust you? Qingya asked, her voice low. If I give you the intel and you arrest us anyway, I lose everything. I reached out and gripped her chin, forcing her to look into my eyes. I can't prove anything to you. You either trust my character or you don't. The choice is yours. I projected a hint of that mysterious power from my sea of consciousness, letting a subtle ripple of authority wash over her. For a moment, she looked dazed, as if she were seeing that giant, heavenly eye again. After a long silence, her red lips finally parted. Fine, she whispered. I'll give you the information. Morning light flooded the room, turning the chamber into a sea of gold. Qingya opened her eyes, feeling a wave of exhaustion hit her. Her body felt heavy, her waist was sore, and her knees were bruised as if she'd been kneeling for hours. Memories of the night came rushing back. She looked to her side and saw me lying there, my hand still draped firmly over her waist. When she tried to move, I pulled her closer into my chest. Her face flushed deep red. She had spent years using illusions to trick men, never letting a single one touch her. She was pure, yet here she was, sharing a bed with the future prince consort. Her reputation was effectively ruined. Good morning, I said, my eyes still closed. Can you let go of me now? She asked, trying to sound composed. Not yet, I murmured. This house is full of your people. If I let you go, you might decide to tear me apart. I'm a cautious man. I hadn't left last night because of the curfew, but I stayed alert the entire time. Is the intel ready? Qingya took a deep breath, trying to ignore the heat of my hand on her skin. Xiao Lian, she called out. The door burst open instantly. Xiao Lian charged in, her eyes bloodshot and a long blade in her hand. She looked like she hadn't slept a wink, having spent the entire night pacing the courtyard after I kicked her out of the room. Miss, Xiao Lian screamed, her killing intent focused entirely on me. Did this bastard do anything to you last night? Qingya shook her head, though her expression was strained. She didn't tell her assistant that every time she had tried to circulate her energy to escape during the night, I had reacted instantly, as if I had eyes in the back of my head. It had been a long, psychological battle of wills, and she had lost. I woke up before her. The moment she tried to stir, I pinned her down again. I didn't like her rebellious streak, so I gave her a little punishment. I made her kneel in a shameful position for hours until her strength gave out. By the time I let her lie back down to sleep, her jade-white knees were bruised and trembling. After that, she didn't dare try any more little tricks. She realized I wasn't just some noble brat. I was dangerous. Xiaolian burst into the room, her eyes darting between us. She saw the unnatural flush on her mistress's face and grew even more frantic. Even if she hadn't heard anything loud last night, a man and a woman sharing a bed for hours left everything to the imagination. In her mind, the worst had already happened. "Give me the files," I said, waving Xiao Lian over like she was my own servant. "It's late. I have to get to work." Xiao Lian looked like she was about to explode, but she didn't move until Qingya gave a weak nod. Qingya was exhausted. She had spent the entire night in a psychological tug-of-war with me and hadn't won a single inch of ground. She just wanted me gone. Xiao Lian returned a moment later with a stack of documents. I took them with one hand, while finally releasing my grip on Qingya's shoulder. She let out a long, shaky breath. Her clothes were a mess, sliding off her shoulders, leaving us with barely any barrier between our skin. Even though I was focused on the papers, she didn't dare move. She knew now that even when I slept, I was watching. My instincts were sharp enough to catch her the second she twitched. It was a terrifying level of control. I flipped through the pages and smiled. "Interesting. It seems your Imperial City Department has quite a few rats planted inside the Procuratorate. The world's 3 greatest shadow organizations, the Lantern Bearers of Great Wu, the Imperial City Department of Great Qing, and the Procuratorate of Great Feng, were always at each other's throats. The capital was a battlefield of spies. Everyone knew it, but no one could stop it. If you wiped out one nest, a new one would appear by morning. We were supposed to be allies with the Procuratorate, Qingya said, her voice cold. But they tried to use us as a shield this time. They shouldn't be surprised that we're striking back. I finished the files and went silent for a moment. Then, I bit my finger. A drop of deep red blood, glowing with a strange energy, welled up at the tip. "Open your mouth," I commanded. Qingya hesitated, sensing the power in that blood. She was a mystic. She knew blood could be used for dark arts. I didn't wait for her permission. I grabbed her chin, forced her mouth open, and pressed my finger inside. She coughed and gasped, clutching her throat once I pulled away. "What did you do?" she hissed. "It's a technique from my household," I said calmly. "Even a martial artist can use it. My essence is in you now. No matter where you run, I will find you. I suggest you make sure this intel is accurate. Also, you need a new identity. If you stay obedient, we might have more to talk about." I stood up from the bed like a demon rising from the shadows. "It's time. Help me wash up and get dressed." I treated her place like my own home. My voice was gentle, but my tone left no room for refusal. Qingya bit her lip, her eyes swirling with complex emotions, but she eventually stood up. She had never served anyone before. Her hands were clumsy as she combed my hair and adjusted my robes. It was a mess, but I stayed patient. I wasn't in a rush. This wasn't about the clothes. It was an obedience test. I needed to know she was broken in. I walked into the yamen feeling refreshed. Xia Qian was already there, waiting for me. "Young master," he called out, rushing over. "Boss, how was last night?" Li Shi asked from the other side. He had that knowing, dirty smirk on his face that men get when they think they know exactly what you've been doing. "It was great," I said, patting Li Shi on the shoulder. "Couldn't have been better." Li Shi chuckled, thinking he was in on the joke. I didn't bother explaining. I looked around the courtyard at the men gathered there. "Is everyone here?" I asked, my smile vanishing instantly. "Most of them," Xia Qian replied, looking confused by my sudden shift in tone. "Good. Assemble the Jia and E battalions." Now, the mood shifted instantly. 200 men scrambled into formation. The other camps watched from the sidelines, wondering why we were arming ourselves so heavily at dawn. I pulled Xiaohui aside and whispered my orders into his ear. His expression grew grimmer with every word I spoke. We split into 2 groups. I told him, "Move fast. If anyone resists, shoot to kill. But the core targets? I want them alive." "Yes, Commander," Xiaohui barked. In the camp, he didn't call me young master. He followed the chain of command. I stepped in front of the troops. Jia Battalion follows Xiaohui. E Battalion follows me. Move out. I didn't give them a reason. I didn't tell them where we were going. These were soldiers. They didn't need to know the why unless I was ordering them to storm the palace. 100 fully armed guards marched out of the gates behind me, heading straight for East Street. "Young master," Xiaoqian whispered, catching up to my side as we marched. "What exactly are we doing?" I didn't look at him. I just kept walking. The hunt had officially begun. "Don't ask questions," I said, my voice cold. "You'll see soon enough." Xiaoqian pulled his head back, shrinking slightly. He knew that look on my face. Whenever I got this serious, something big was about to go down. 15 minutes later, we arrived at East Main Street. This was the heart of the capital's entertainment district, packed with tea houses and theaters. Every new play or folk story started here before spreading across the entire Great Wu Empire. I stopped in front of the most famous one of them all, Baiwa Theater. "Surround the building," I ordered, my eyes scanning the ornate entrance. "Don't let a single fly escape. If anyone tries to break the perimeter despite our warnings, shoot to kill." The soldiers behind me felt a chill run down their spines. The capital was full of powerful officials and nobles, especially here at Baiwa Theater. Word was that even members of the imperial family came here to listen to the music. Killing someone with the wrong background could mean execution for the soldiers involved. But then they looked at me, their commander, and their hesitation vanished. They moved with lethal efficiency, sealing every exit. Inside, the theater was alive with music and cheers. On a massive, luxurious stage, actors were performing the latest sensation, The Tale of the Mandarin Ducks. It was a massive hit. The theater had to run it 3 times a day just to satisfy the constant stream of wealthy patrons. The story was a classic tragedy. A young noble from a marquis's house falls in love with a princess from the eastern barbarian tribes. They overcome every obstacle to be together, but just when the audience thinks they've found happiness, the princess dies. It was a bold move by the playwright. The audience was hooked. The male lead, driven mad by grief, begins a dark path of revenge. It was fresh, edgy, and every seat in the house was sold out. The soldiers, they've surrounded us. Just as the play reached its climax, servants and attendants from various noble houses rushed into the hall. Panic flared in the private boxes. The main doors were kicked open with a deafening bang. Armed imperial guards poured in, their blades drawn and gleaming under the lanterns. "Imperial Guard business. Nobody move," I shouted. My voice boomed through the hall, vibrating in the chests of everyone present. "Stay where you are, or be cut down where you stand." The room froze. A dozen guards drew their swords in unison with my shout. Beside me, others leveled heavy repeating crossbows and firearms at the crowd. These were armor-piercing weapons. If they fired, the room would turn into a slaughterhouse in seconds. The nobles, who had been ready to scream about their interrupted play, swallowed their words and sat back down, trembling. My gaze swept over the crowd, landing instantly on the stage. I locked eyes with the handsome young actor playing the lead role. He was staring back at me. He's quite good-looking, the actor thought, judging me. "So, this is the guy," I thought, recalling the intel Qing had given me. This actor was a heartthrob, the idol of every noblewoman in the city. But to me, he was just a target. "Take him," I said, pointing a finger at the lead actor. 5 guards lunged forward like tigers, their movements crisp and professional. The actor's face went pale. He knew this wasn't a random inspection. They were here for him. Suddenly, a female martial artist playing a supporting role stepped in front of him. She flicked her wrist, sending a flurry of hidden needles toward my man. The guards raised their blades to deflect the projectiles, sparks flying in the dim light. 3 more actors joined the fray, and the stage erupted into a chaotic brawl. The audience gasped in horror. Daggers and splinters flew near their seats, making them realize the actors they had been cheering for were actually high-level martial artists. "Go," I said calmly. 10 more elites from my unit charged the stage. More guards flooded through the doors, cutting off any hope of escape. The lead actor's heart sank. His identity was blown. Even if he broke out of the theater, the city patrols and the lantern-bearers hiding in the shadows would hunt him down. He was trapped, but he wasn't going down without a fight. He reached into his sleeves and threw out a handful of paper dolls. In midair, the paper figures expanded, growing into man-sized warriors holding swords and sabers. They moved as if they were alive, their paper bodies clashing against the steel of the Imperial Guard with surprising strength. The theater was a chorus of screams and clashing metal. I narrowed my eyes. This was taking too long. I needed a lightning strike to catch the Inspectorate's spies off guard, not a prolonged siege. "All of you move. Take them now." I reached back and drew my crimson blade. As my inner energy surged, the sword began to glow with a scorching heat. My aura exploded, primal, masculine, and utterly dominant. I lunged forward, my blade carving a path of fire through the air. I struck one of the paper warriors, and it instantly burst into flames, turning to ash in seconds. I led the charge, a tiger among sheep. Every swing of my sword incinerated another paper puppet. Xia Qian and the rest of the guards followed my lead, overwhelming the remaining defenders. My eyes never left the lead actor. According to the files, he was a high-ranking member of the Inspectorate's network in the capital. He was the one coordinating their local operations. Most importantly, he was the key to the stolen military defense maps. The actor's face was deathly white. Controlling the paper puppets was draining his life force rapidly. "Go. I'll hold them back," the female martial artist screamed, standing firmly in his way. I didn't stop. I closed the distance in a blur of crimson light. The hunt was ending here. The lead actress didn't hesitate. She swung her heavy blade downward with the force of a falling mountain, aiming to split me in two. I didn't flinch. It was as if I could see the future. I moved before her blade even reached its peak. I swung my own saber in a horizontal arc. For a split second, everyone in the theater saw a blinding sun rise from the edge of my blade. The light washed over the room, turning the world white. When the light faded and people finally opened their eyes, they saw the actress frozen in place. A thin red line appeared down the center of her body. Then, before the horrified crowd, she split perfectly in two. Blood sprayed across the stage, painting the floor a gruesome crimson. It was a bloodbath. Upstairs in the private booths, noble ladies and wealthy socialites turned pale. The handsome young officer they had been admiring seconds ago was now a monster in their eyes. Their infatuation turned to pure, raw terror. Seeing a human being butchered like that was enough to shatter anyone's nerves. With blood splattered across my face, I looked less like a soldier and more like a demon crawled out of hell. I didn't stop to admire my work. I stepped over the remains and lunged straight for the lead actor, the man known as Shi Ling. "You're Xia Chun," he hissed, backing away as his eyes locked onto mine. "The waste of the Marquis' estate? It seems everyone was blind. You've been hiding this entire time." He was terrified, and he should have been. To him, I was a 17-year-old who had just executed a peak 8th rank martial artist in a single strike. Even in a family of warriors like mine, that made me a monster of a genius. I didn't give him the satisfaction of a conversation. My eyes were locked on my target. I was playing the role of an assassin now, ignoring the guards throwing themselves in my path to protect their leader. I activated the red goat body-breaking technique, and my inner energy surged, coating my skin like a suit of invisible armor. I moved like lightning. My double pupils flared, and suddenly, the world slowed down. I could see the dust motes hanging in the air. I could see the desperate sweat on Shi Ling's brow. He scrambled toward a nearby window, his feet leaving the ground as he prepared to leap to freedom. He never made it. I appeared behind him like a ghost. I reached out, and for a moment, it felt like I had sucked all the air out of the room. I grabbed him by the back of the neck and hoisted him up like a helpless kitten. He was a sorcerer, dangerous at a distance, but pathetic once a martial artist closed the gap. Especially when that martial artist was me. With their leader captured, the rest of the theater fell quickly. The spies who tried to fight back were cut down by Imperial crossbows, and the rest were forced to their knees. The entire operation took less than 10 minutes. Take them all back to the office, I commanded Xiaqian. I want you to personally lead 30 men. Don't let anyone, and I mean anyone, take these prisoners until I get back. Boss, I'll go with him, Li Shi added, stepping up to help. There are a lot of prisoners. It's safer if we go together. I nodded. My men began moving through the crowd, slamming wind evil needles into the necks of the captured spies. It was a specialized tool from the Celestial Master Mansion designed to lock a warrior's energy. Once those were in, they were going nowhere. Shi Ling glared at me with pure, poisonous hatred. You knew exactly who to hit, he spat. You're trying to steal the credit from the lantern bearers. You've hidden your strength for years. You're an ambitious one, Xiaqian. He had expected the secret police to come for him eventually, but he never expected to be taken down by a waste from the Imperial Guard. I still didn't say a word. I simply raised my hand and slammed a heavy blow into the back of his head, knocking him unconscious instantly. It was violent, but efficient. I didn't hand him over to Xiaqian. I kept him in my grip. The rest of you, follow me. We're going to the next location. Speed was my only advantage. I needed a lightning war to catch the inspectorate off guard before they could burn their documents. Where to next, boss? Li Shi asked, his eyes gleaming with excitement. I don't know, Xiaqian muttered, shaking his head as he began clearing the theater. As we marched out, the audience finally started to breathe again. They whispered frantically, wondering if we were from the palace or the Secret Service. They were terrified, but they were also fascinated. Who was that leader? A young noblewoman whispered, her face flushing red despite the gore on the stage. He's so cruel, but so handsome. Find out which family he belongs to. I need to know if he's married. High above the chaos, in the most expensive private booth, a young man of noble bearing and a sophisticated woman sat sipping tea. They hadn't moved an inch during the slaughter, watching the violence as if it were just another play. Su Buliu, the young man said softly, not turning his head. What do you think of that, officer? A swordsman stepped out from the shadows of the corner. His control of energy is perfect. That strike, all his power was concentrated into a single point of his blade. It was pure yang energy. In the 7th rank, he has very few equals. But I suspect he's still hiding his true strength. Could you beat him if you were at the same level? The young man in the booth asked, his eyes locked on me. Su Buliu didn't answer immediately. He was a legendary genius, a man who had mastered the sword like few others in the capital. I'd have to fight him to know, he finally admitted. The young man looked stunned. Su Buliu was at the peak of the 5th rank, nearing the 4th. For him to be unsure about a 7th rank fighter was unheard of. Interesting, the young man said, a cold smile spreading across his face. Find out who he is. I want him brought to me. A talent like that would make a very fine dog. A woman sitting beside him finally spoke up. This was Princess Pingyang, the emperor's younger sister. She was beautiful, elegant, and deeply involved in the messy world of court politics. She watched me leave the theater, her eyes lingering on my back. No need to search, she said softly. That's Xiaqian, the eldest son of the Marquis of Anong, the one who just got engaged to Yao Guang. The 3rd prince blinked in surprise. The famous waist? But he's supposed to be useless. How is he this strong? My sources said he was handsome, the princess whispered, her gaze tracing the path I had taken. But they didn't say he was this striking. My niece is quite lucky. I had no idea I was being watched by royalty. I didn't care. I was already moving toward my next target, a small, quiet inn. On the surface, it looked normal. In reality, it was a major intelligence hub for the inspectorate. Crossbows ready, I barked as we surrounded the building. The agents inside tried to resist, but they weren't prepared for a full military assault. We tore through the front door, pinning them down before they could even draw their weapons. Search every room, I ordered. Don't leave a single scrap of paper behind. I want every document they have. We moved like a whirlwind. My men were efficient, fueled by the adrenaline of the first raid. But when we reached the 3rd location, a charity house for the elderly, the air changed. It was empty. The tea on the tables was still warm, but the people were gone. The documents had been burned to ash in the hearth. I stared at the flickering embers, my jaw tightened. It had been less than an hour since we left the barracks. The inspectorate's reaction speed was terrifying. They were already cutting their losses. "Sir, where to next?" one of my men asked. "Back to the office," I said, waving them off. "The trail is cold. There's no point in running in circles." When I walked back into the Yulin Guard headquarters, my superior, Qin Mu, was waiting at the gates. He looked like he was about to have a heart attack. "Xia Chun, you took 200 men out without a single order," he hissed, rushing toward me. "The entire city is buzzing. Do you have any idea what you've done?" I knew I had broken protocol. In this world, moving troops without permission was a death sentence for most. But I wasn't most people. I leaned in close to his ear, my voice calm. "Relax, sir," I whispered. "I just handed you the greatest achievement of your career. Once the general sees what I've brought back, he won't be angry. He'll be looking for a way to promote you." Qin Mu froze. The anger in his eyes was replaced by a sudden, sharp greed. He was a career soldier. He knew exactly how the game was played. "Is it that big?" he asked, his voice trembling. "It's massive," I replied with a smirk. "Let's go see the general." We marched into the office of General Li Wenzhong. The man was mid-sip when I dropped the news. "The military maps weren't stolen by the Imperial Guard," I stated firmly. "It was the inspectorate, and I have the prisoners to prove it." Li Wenzhong choked. He sprayed tea all over his desk, his eyes bulging out of his head. "The inspectorate? Are you certain?" "The Lightseekers are convinced it was a palace job." "The Lightseekers are wrong," I said, "and we're the only ones who know the truth. Everything would be clear once we interrogated them. Even if these people weren't the ones who took the military maps, they were confirmed inspectorate spies. That was a fact. No matter how you looked at it, this was a massive win for us." General Li Wenzhong sat back down, trying to keep his composure. But he couldn't stop the smile from spreading across his face. If the inspectorate really had the maps, this wasn't just a win. It was a career-defining triumph. Even if I was wrong, catching a nest of spies was still a huge achievement. He had nothing to lose. "There is one problem," he muttered, his brow furrowing. "The Lightseekers. They have a lot of influence. I'm not sure I can handle the pressure if they come knocking." I didn't let him finish the thought. "It doesn't matter, General," I said firmly. "We are the Yulin Guard, the Emperor's personal soldiers. The Lightseekers have no authority over us. Besides, we have every right to protect the city's security. This is perfectly legal." Li Wenzhong hesitated for only a second. His eyes turned sharp. The prize was too big to pass up. If he backed down now, he'd look like a coward. And he had his own backing, after all. "Fine," he said, his voice hardening. "Keep this quiet for now. Break their spirits, get the confessions, and gather every scrap of evidence. Once we have it all, I'll go to the palace and present it to His Majesty myself." He looked at me with a new kind of respect. I wasn't grabbing for all the glory. I was handing it to him on a silver platter. I gave him a respectful salute and told him I'd follow his lead. I knew how the game worked. If you want to survive in politics, you have to share the cake. You feed the people below you and satisfy the people above you. Those who try to eat alone usually end up starving or dead. I was still too weak to face the Lightseekers head-on. It was better to let Li Wenzhong take the heat while I grew stronger in the shadows. As we walked out, I saw Qin Mu staring at me. He looked dazed. He was supposed to be my superior, yet he couldn't even get a word in while I negotiated with the general. He looked like he'd realized he was just a side character in his own life. But then he shrugged. If he could get promoted by doing absolutely nothing, he wasn't going to complain. He decided to just play the supporting role and enjoy the ride. Outside the tent, my subordinate Xia Hui was waiting. "Report," I said. "Sir, we hit 3 locations," Xia Hui replied. "We captured several high-ranking targets. But by the time we reached the 4th one, it was empty." I nodded. "We had the leader, Shi Ling. That was enough." By noon, the entire Yulin Guard base was buzzing. The atmosphere was electric. Even the high-ranking officers were pacing back and forth near the holding cells. When General Li came out of the interrogation area, he was beaming. I spent the afternoon in the cells with the prisoners. The Yulin Guard didn't have a formal prison, just a few airless, reinforced rooms. To speed things up, I taught the guards a few memory recovery techniques I'd picked up. Basically, I showed them how to make someone talk without killing them. Soon, the screams started. They were high-pitched and constant. The guards started looking at me differently. There was fear in their eyes. They realized their new captain wasn't just a noble kid. He was a monster when he needed to be. Even trained spies couldn't hold out against what I'd taught them. By the afternoon, the inevitable happened. The light seekers arrived. They weren't stupid. We had moved too many men and made too much noise. The news had spread through the capital like wildfire. A man named Kai Ming, a 1,000-man commander of the light seekers, stood at our gates with a dozen men. He held up his badge, his face a mask of cold authority. "I am Kai Ming," he stated. "I'm here on behalf of my commander to take custody of the prisoners." Qin Mu met him at the gate, blocking the path. He looked confused, playing the part perfectly. "Commander Kai? I think there's a mistake." "What prisoners?" Kai Ming's eyes narrowed. "Don't play games, Qin Mu. We know the Yulin Guard rounded up a group of spies this morning. Espionage is our jurisdiction. Hand them over." Qin Mu laughed. He wasn't scared at all. "Spies? We didn't catch any spies. We received reports from local citizens about some dangerous criminals planning a riot. As the Emperor's Guard, it's our job to keep the peace. We're just questioning them to make sure there are no others. Once we're done, we'll let you know." Kai Ming's jaw tightened. He knew we were lying. "I don't have time for this. Whether they're spies or common thugs, they belong in our dungeons. Hand them over, and we'll make sure the Imperial Guard gets a mention in the report." He tried to push past, but Qin Mu didn't budge. "This is a military headquarters," Qin Mu said, his voice turning cold. "Not even the light seekers can barge in here without a direct order." The Yulin soldiers behind him stepped forward, forming a human wall. The air was thick with tension. The fight for the credit had officially begun. Kai Ming's face turned livid. He stared at Qin Mu, his expression shifting like a storm cloud. For a long time, he didn't say a word. Finally, he regained his composure. "Fine," he spat, his voice freezing cold. "I'll report this to my commander. The Imperial Guard has no right to hold these prisoners. We will be filing a formal complaint against you." He turned on his heel and marched away. He knew he couldn't force his way in. He wasn't stupid. A lowly captain wouldn't dare be this stubborn unless someone powerful was backing him. "Commander, what do we do now?" one of his men asked. Kai Ming snapped, kicking the man in frustration. "What do you think? We go back and report. I'm a 1,000-man commander, not a miracle worker. I can't flip their headquarters upside down on my own." But inside, his mind was racing. Why would the Yulin Guard risk offending the Light Seekers? There was only one answer. Credit. It had to be the stolen military maps. He had a bad feeling. They knew the Yulin Guard had arrested people from the Great Feng Prosecutor's office that morning, but they didn't know the specifics. Li Wenzhong and I had locked the information down tight. No one was allowed to leave the prison. Even for an intelligence agency like the Light Seekers, spying on the Imperial Guard was a death sentence unless the Emperor himself ordered it. They were flying blind. When Kai Ming reported his suspicions, the Light Seekers' massive machine ground into gear. They were terrifying when they had a purpose. By nightfall, they tracked down a group of prosecutors' office members who had fled their hideout earlier that morning. Under brutal interrogation, the truth finally spilled. The military maps, stolen by the prosecutor's office. Lu Li, the commander of the Light Seekers, stared at his subordinate. He slumped back into his chair, his heart sinking. They had spent days chasing the wrong leads. If the Emperor found out his agency was this incompetent, his career was over. "Get Shinfong in here." "How did he mess this up?" Lu Li roared. But he calmed himself quickly. He needed to fix this. "Get my robes. I'm going out." It was the middle of the night. Lu Li had been in bed with his concubine, but now he was wide awake. He needed to get to the Yulin Guard headquarters immediately. He had to talk to Li Wenzhong. They had to turn this failure into a joint operation, a shared victory between their two departments. But as he reached the front hall, his butler ran in, pale-faced. "Master, someone from the palace is here." Lu Li froze. He was too late. The Yulin Guard had already made their move. I woke up the next morning feeling refreshed. I'd stayed late at the office the night before, making sure every piece of evidence was airtight before I left. The high-level political games weren't my concern anymore. I practiced my punches in the yard, working up a sweat. Just as I was about to head to work, a servant appeared at my gate. "Third young master, the head of the house wants to see you." I headed toward the inner courtyard. I knew what this was about. Li Wenzhong had gone to the palace overnight to settle the score. The news was likely already official. I arrived at the Mingda courtyard, a place with 400 years of history carved into its stones. Every head of the house had lived here. As I walked in, I ran into my second brother, Xia Xian. He was a commander in the Dragon Braves and a rising star in the military. He looked at me differently today. There was a new kind of weight in his gaze. "Go in," Xia Xian said simply. "Father is waiting." We weren't close, but there was no malice in his voice. I walked into the garden and saw my uncle, Xia Qian, sitting at a stone table. I didn't stand on ceremony. I sat down and started eating the snacks the maid had laid out. They were delicious, much better than the breakfast I usually had in my own quarters. Xia Qian watched me eat for a moment. "The military map business," he said, his voice direct. "Was that your plan?" I swallowed a pastry and took a sip of tea. "Mostly," I replied. But I gave the credit to Li Wenzhong. He's the one standing in the line of fire. Xia Qian nodded, looking satisfied. "You did the right thing. You're just a captain. Being too bright this early in your career is dangerous." Xia Qian nodded as I spoke. The look in his eyes shifted from simple curiosity to genuine approval. "Do you know what happened last night?" he asked, his voice turning serious and sharp. I shook my head. After General Li Wenzhong went to the palace, I came back home. I didn't get involved in the aftermath. I knew my part was done. There was no point in chasing the falling debris once the explosion started. "Lu Li has fallen," Xia Qian said calmly. The words hit like a physical weight. Lu Li had commanded the lantern bearers for 26 years. He was the king of shadows, handpicked by the emperor himself to handle every dirty, dark secret in the great Wu Empire. To see a man like that topple meant a political earthquake was coming. People in high places were about to die in the shadows as the power map was redrawn. Was it because of the military maps? I asked. Partially, Xia Qian sighed. Losing the maps was a massive failure of duty. But his real mistake was targeting the wrong person this time. 2 major blunders in a row were enough. The emperor stripped him of his command right there in the palace last night. My uncle looked tired, lost in his own thoughts. I stayed silent for a moment, processing it. I hadn't expected my actions to take down one of the top 5 most powerful men in the country. The maps were just the spark, weren't they? I said, looking around the quiet garden before taking a sip of tea. He's been the emperor's blade for decades. He's done too much dirty work and offended too many people. Everyone wanted a chance to stab him. This failure just gave them the excuse they needed. Xia Qian's gaze turned razor sharp. He stared at me for several long seconds, the air between us growing heavy. Suddenly, he slammed his hand down. "Silence. Watch your tongue." He shouted it as a warning, but his eyes were glowing with a strange light. He was shocked. I had spent my whole life locked away in this estate, yet I had just analyzed the court's power struggle with surgical precision. The Xia family had plenty of warriors, but we were short on political masterminds. Even my older brothers, the prodigies, didn't have this kind of insight. I could see the wheels turning in Xia Qian's head. He looked at me with a new kind of softness, perhaps regretting that he'd sent me toward a military life instead of the path of a scholar. I didn't stop there. I wanted to see how far I could push. "Our emperor is brilliant," I continued, my voice low, "but he's also incredibly selfish. He spends his years pitting the civil officials against the military to keep us balanced. He used Lu Li and Princess Pingyang as his shields, letting them take the blame for every bloody thing he ordered while he sat safely on his throne. Lu Li did the killing, but the emperor took the rewards. His grasp of imperial power is flawless. To me, this emperor felt exactly like the historical tyrants from my old world, geniuses of control who cared for nothing but their own grip on the seat of power." "What else do you see?" Xia Qian asked. He wasn't angry anymore. He wanted to hear more. I smiled inwardly. The Marquis of Andong's estate had survived for 600 years. You don't last that long just by being loyal. You last by being smart. My uncle and my father had played the roles of quiet, reclusive soldiers for years specifically to avoid the emperor's suspicion. "The civil officials are the ones celebrating the most today," I said. "Correct," Xia Qian nodded. The Grand Secretary himself moved against Lu Li this time. The lantern bearers were meant to balance the factions, but they leaned too hard on the civil side. They've grown too strong, and the emperor felt the threat. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on mine. You did well, but you were the trigger. Even if Li Wenjong is taking the credit, people will notice. Li Wenjong isn't smart enough to have pulled this off alone, and he's never been one to snatch credit from the lantern bearers. I know you took your men out without orders yesterday. I know you made the arrest before reporting it. I felt a chill. Nothing stayed hidden from my uncle for long. If I can figure it out, other smart people in the capital will too, Xiaqian warned. Keep a low profile for a while. I'll handle the fallout and keep the heat off you. Thank you, uncle, I said, bowing deeply like a perfect, humble gentleman. He waved me away, satisfied. Over the next few days, the capital descended into chaos. The Ministry of Justice and the Imperial Guard were everywhere. High-ranking officials were being dragged from their homes, leaving empty seats that everyone below them scrambled to fill. In the shadows, the lantern bearers went on a rampage, hunting down spies and informants across the city. Blood ran in the back alleys. And far away on the northwest border, the drums of war began to beat. The armies were moving. The storm I had started was only just beginning. The threat of war hung over the capital like a heavy shroud. To the west, the Qin kingdom was stirring, and to the north, the Great Feng Empire was mobilizing its banners. The atmosphere was suffocating. Every major military leader in the empire was being summoned to the palace for emergency councils. The cabinet was already debating the impossible question. If a two-front war broke out, who would lead our armies? My uncle, Xia Qian, was called to the palace daily. Rumors trickled down through the ranks that the emperor was considering activating my grandfather, the old Marquis of Anong, Xia Chutian. 36 years ago, during the Battle of Huaiyang, my grandfather had nearly wiped the Great Feng Empire off the map. The court had absolute faith in him, but I knew the political reality was different. The emperor won't let your grandfather take the field, my uncle told me as we strolled through the family gardens. His military merit from Huaiyang is already too great. If he wins another war, the emperor would be forced to name him a king. Neither the emperor nor the cabinet will ever let that happen. Lately, my uncle had been seeking me out constantly, sharing intelligence and asking for my perspective. It was a strange shift. He looked at me, his eyes full of complex emotions. I knew what he was thinking. Nobody would ever suspect that the massive political earthquake currently swallowing the capital had been triggered by me, a lowly lieutenant in the Imperial Guard. So, I said, keeping my voice casual, if the Qin Kingdom attacks, the only people capable of leading the defense are you and the Grand Marshal. I wasn't flattering him. In the entire Great Wu Empire, only 3 men could handle large-scale army maneuvers: my grandfather, my uncle, and the Grand Marshal, Ouyang Jing. 2 of those 3 were members of the Xia family. It was no wonder my family acted so humble and surrendered their military power the moment a war ended. Any emperor would be terrified of us. The emperor has ordered my brother, Xia Yuan, to end the conflict in the eastern wastelands immediately, my uncle explained. We can't fight on 2 sides, but the emperor won't let me and your father hold major commands at the same time. Between us, we'd control nearly half the empire's military force. No ruler would gamble on our loyalty like that. I stayed silent. It seemed my parents would be returning from the eastern wastelands soon. I didn't know how to feel about that. While the generals planned for war, the capital dealt with its own internal shifts. A man named Ma Song had been appointed as the new commander of the Lantern Bearers. It shocked everyone. Ma Song had been a nobody, leading the smallest and most insignificant of the 8 divisions. But while his superiors fell alongside Lu Li, he had survived and snatched the ultimate prize. I didn't care much about the Lantern Bearers. I was waiting for my own reward. The military map scandal was settling down, and I knew a promotion was coming within the next day or 2. There was one other thing on my mind: Qingyao Pavilion. The night after I left, the entire place had burned to the ground. Not a single soul was found alive. The city's elite were heartbroken, mourning the loss of their goddess, the beautiful Qingyao. What a waste, my cousin Xia Qian sighed the next morning. He was stuffing his face with fried dough sticks and soy milk as we walked. He had seen her that night and couldn't believe she was gone. So young, and now she's just ash. I bit into a steamed bun, the savory juices exploding on my tongue. The buns in this part of the city were good, but I missed the spicy rice noodles from my old life. I swallowed and looked at my cousin. Everyone has their own fate, I said cryptically. Some people are dead but still living. Others are living but already dead. He scratched his head, clearly confused by my philosophy. I didn't explain. I didn't believe for a second that Qingya was dead. She was a survivor. She knew that after the fall of Lu Li, people would come looking for the source of my information. She had burned her identity to erase the trail. I glanced at my system interface. A small red dot was pulsing on the map. I had lied to her that night. My blood didn't have any tracking properties. I was a martial artist, not a sorcerer. But I had a system. I had already mapped out 95% of the capital, and I had tagged her. As long as she was within the city walls, she was a prisoner in my sight. The map showed her hiding in the Western District. I wasn't going to hunt her down yet. I'd save that surprise for a late-night visit when she least expected it. When I arrived at the Yulin Guard barracks, my superior, Qin Mu, was waiting for me. He looked uncharacteristically excited. "Commander, what brings you here personally?" I asked, staying seated. "Commander? Drop the formalities," he said, his face wrinkling into a massive grin. He sat down next to me and poured himself a cup of tea. "If you don't mind, just call me Old Qin." It was obvious that after everything we'd been through, our relationship had shifted. We were closer now. "After this is settled, you might just jump straight to the rank of commandant," Qin Mu said, taking a sip of his tea. He exhaled a long breath, looking at me with a mix of admiration and disbelief. Two commandants of the same rank. A 17-year-old commandant, and here I am at 35. I could see what he was thinking. At my age, having this kind of standing meant my future was limitless. "The investigation into the military maps is finished?" I asked. I knew immediately that the dust was settling. It was time to harvest the rewards of our victory. If it weren't for that, Qin Mu wouldn't be this excited. Even though the Northwest military situation was the talk of the town, the high-ranking officials hadn't forgotten about the stolen maps. Our Yulin Guard had cracked the case. That was a massive achievement. "The rewards should be announced in a few days," Qin Mu said, trying to suppress his grin as he calmed his nerves. "Congratulations, sir," I said, raising my teacup to him in a silent toast. "Haha, you're the one who deserves the most credit," he laughed. "The general has already reported your deeds to the top. After this, you'll be a commandant at the very least." He sighed again. "If I weren't so young, my contribution, breaking the map case and dismantling the Great Feng Inspectorate spy network in the capital, would have earned me an even higher rank." Even so, a 17-year-old 5th-rank commandant was a rarity in the 800-year history of the Great Wu dynasty. I just smiled and didn't push the subject. "The general will likely be transferred to the Longwu Guard to serve as the Grand General," Qin Mu continued, his mood soaring. "I'll probably follow him there. That leaves a perfect opening for you to take my spot here." The Yulin Guard and the Longwu Guard were different beasts. The Yulin Guard had 3,000 men and handled city security. But the Longwu Guard? They were 6,000 elite soldiers responsible for the inner palace and the emperor's personal safety. Their Grand General reported directly to Emperor Wen. If Li Wenzhong secured that position, he would be at the absolute heart of power. "Is the news reliable?" I asked. "The general has entered the palace twice in the last 2 days. There shouldn't be any surprises." My mind started racing. A shift in positions meant a reshuffling of power. If Li Wenzhong was getting the Longwu Guard, it meant he was officially part of the emperor's inner circle. My earlier guess was right. He was the emperor's man. Qin Mu leaned in close, checking our surroundings before whispering in my ear. The previous Longwu Grand General got a bit too close to the Crown Prince. So, he didn't finish the sentence, but I understood perfectly. The Longwu Grand General was the emperor's bodyguard. For a bodyguard to get close to the heir was a signal no emperor could tolerate. The relationship between a ruler and his prince was always complicated. They were family, but also rivals. The prince was the only person who could legally threaten the emperor's power. I filed this information away, connecting the dots. The emperor didn't trust the crown prince, so he was propping up the third prince to maintain a balance. It was a classic move, but I knew it was the very thing that would lead to the third prince's coup in 5 years. A spark of ambition lit up in my chest. The political stage was getting crowded, and I wanted my turn to dance. That afternoon, I stayed in the barracks instead of patrolling the streets. The air felt heavy with the coming promotions. I sat at my desk, studying a volume of the Nine-Yang Art of War. It was a famous text that every aspiring strategist read. I had read it before, but even now, I found the insights brilliant. "Sir," a voice called from outside. "Enter," I said, my eyes never leaving the page. Li Shi walked in and stopped, momentarily stunned. I had taken off my armor and wore simple, casual clothes. My hair was tied back loosely with a single pin. I must have looked more like a scholar or a wandering immortal than a soldier. "What is it?" I asked calmly. "The general wants to see you, sir." "It's likely good news," Li Shi said, keeping his head down. He seemed intimidated by the quiet intensity one was radiating. "Understood. You're dismissed." I didn't let my emotions show. The closer I got to the goal, the calmer I became. I straightened my robes and walked toward Li Wenzhong's tent at a steady pace. When I entered, I found Li Wenzhong sitting at his desk, holding the exact same book I had been reading. The Art of War says, "A general must have a clear mind to devise schemes, and a stern spirit to discipline the army," Li Wenzhong recited without looking up. "What follows?" "A general must remain rational regardless of joy or sorrow," I replied instantly. "It is the opening line. One must not be swayed by emotion." Li Wenzhong set the book down and smiled. "You have incredible composure. You truly are a son of the Xia family, a line that has produced great generals for generations." He seemed impressed. For days, while the capital was in an uproar, I hadn't once pestered him about the rewards or my new rank. I acted less like a 17-year-old boy and more like a seasoned veteran of the courts. "I trust you, sir," I said with a confident smile. "Since I left the matter in your hands, I only had to wait for the result." "I told you, call me uncle when we're alone," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "Curious about your reward?" "Qin Mu told me this morning that I'd likely be taking his place as commandant while he follows you to the Longwu Guard." Li Wenzhong's expression shifted slightly. "That was the original plan for the rewards. But things have changed." I frowned. "An unexpected change?" I started calculating the possibilities. "Qin Mu and I are still moving to the Longwu Guard," Li Wenzhong said, looking at me with a strange expression. "But the change, it's about you." I assumed the problem was with Li Wenzhong's promotion to Great General of the Longwu Guard. I was wrong. The problem was me. "The original plan was to promote you to Commandant," Li Wenzhong said, looking at me intensely. But His Majesty intervened. "The Emperor?" I felt a flicker of light in my eyes. I hadn't expected the man at the top to personally interfere with a mid-level military appointment. "Don't worry too much," Li Wenzhong added, taking a slow sip of his tea. "He didn't say you couldn't be commandant. He just said there was no rush. He thinks young people need more tempering." He smiled as he spoke. I realized he was enjoying the fact that he'd finally provoked an emotional reaction from me. Until now, I'd been so calm I seemed older than him. Seeing me rattled was a relief to him. It was a strange situation. Thousands of officials served this empire, but only a handful ever entered the emperor's field of vision. This was a rare spotlight. Li Wenzhong patted my shoulder, his expression turning serious. "Get ready. You're coming to the palace with me." "To the palace?" I asked. "The emperor wants to see you personally," he said. This was huge. For years, the emperor had rarely attended court. Most officials only saw his face once a year at the Grand Annual Assembly. He usually communicated through the cabinet ministers. For him to summon me privately sent a massive message to the outside world. Was I being used, or was I being groomed? Even Li Wenzhong couldn't guess the emperor's intent. I took a deep breath to steady my racing heart. I had performed great service for the empire, and I was the future son-in-law. Surely, Emperor Wen wouldn't eat me alive. Half an hour later, we were in a carriage heading toward the heart of the inner city. As we rode, Li Wenzhong gave me a crash course on the man we were about to meet. Emperor Wen had ruled for over 50 years. He had spent 20 years obsessed with Buddhism and the next 10 with Taoism. He was cold and detached until his ministers begged him to produce heirs. That resulted in the crown prince, the second princess, and the third prince. After they were born, he became less indifferent, but in the last decade, he had become an enigma. No one could read his mind. "When you face him, don't let your thoughts wander," Li Wenzhong warned in a low voice. "Just listen and obey." I nodded, forming a mental picture of the ruler. Emperor Wen was a man of contradictions. Under his rule, the Great Wu Empire had grown powerful. He had nearly wiped out the Great Feng Empire 36 years ago and pushed the southern borders hundreds of miles further 20 years ago. Now, the war with the eastern demons was ending. Great Wu was the supreme power, feared by all. But there was a dark side. Decades of constant warfare had bled the common people dry. The internal tension was at a breaking point. On the surface, we were the #1 nation in the world, but underneath, we were crumbling. I knew from my memories of the future that if the Empress didn't rise to power, this empire would collapse in a bloody coup in 5 years. The carriage stopped before a massive, towering wall. We stepped out. We had arrived at the imperial palace. Soldiers in heavy armor guarded the gates. 2 men stepped forward as we approached. "Please dismount," one said. "Carriages are not permitted beyond this point." Lordly, the soldiers saluted Li Wenzhong with military precision. They were men of the Longwu Guard. Rumors had already spread that their current general was falling and Li Wenzhong was taking over. They were eager to show respect to their new boss. "Search us," Li Wenzhong said, spreading his arms. "I need to enter the palace." Even the highest officials had to be patted down. It was the rule. "No need, my lord," the soldier said quickly. "The emperor's decree has already arrived. You may enter directly." Li Wenzhong nodded and walked through. I followed silently, keeping my eyes open. We were passing through the White Tiger Gate. My heart chilled. If I remembered correctly, this was where the coup would start in 5 years. The third prince would lead his army through these very gates, turning the palace into a slaughterhouse. The walls were incredibly high, reinforced with defensive spells, and lined with crossbowmen. Taking this place by force would require tens of thousands of lives. The only way to breach it was from the inside. That meant the third prince must have bought off the commander of the White Tiger Gate. Some of the Longwu Guard were already traitors. I filed that information away for later. We followed an old eunuch through a maze of pavilions and halls. I looked around at the sheer luxury. Glazed tiles shimmered like fallen stars under the sunlight. Carved beams and painted pillars told stories of ancient legends. It was a place of dreamlike beauty and crushing imperial majesty. 800 years of history were etched into every brick. "Generally, you may take the consort to be inside," the old eunuch said with a polite smile. He didn't have the usual arrogance of palace officials. He acted like a humble servant. Li Wenzhong nodded curtly. He was about to become a great general. Unless it was one of the powerful heads of the 12 directorates, he didn't need to be overly polite to a messenger. "Thank you for your hard work, Eunuch Ma," I said. I slipped a piece of silver into his hand. The eunuch's eyes lit up, but he hesitated, trying to wave it off. "It is my duty to serve the emperor. I couldn't possibly take money from the marquis's son." These old palace foxes were smart. He knew my background. If I were just a regular political pawn, he wouldn't care. But I was a son of the Xia family, and the emperor was meeting me privately. That made me dangerous. "It's just a little something for some wine," I said with a smile. I didn't give him a choice, flipping my wrist and tucking the silver into his belt. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked toward the grand hall to meet the man who held my life in his hands. Eunuch Ma felt the heavy weight of the silver in his belt. He watched my back as I walked away, looking a bit stunned. Even though he ran errands for the emperor, he had no real power. The high-ranking officials he usually dealt with never treated him with respect. Nobody ever cared how long he'd been waiting, let alone gave him a tip. He felt the lingering warmth of the silver, took a deep breath, and tucked it into his pocket. His eyes returned to a calm, professional stillness. I stepped into the palace. A long, echoing corridor led us into a massive hall. Before I could even take in the surroundings, Li Wenzhong grabbed my arm and pulled me down to my knees. "You may rise," a voice said. It was ethereal, drifting through the air so that I couldn't tell exactly where it came from. I stood and finally looked around. In the very center of the hall, an old man sat cross-legged on the floor. He wore a Taoist robe, but a string of Buddhist prayer beads hung around his neck. His hair was streaked with white. He kept his back to us, hiding his face. This was the man who controlled the entire Great Wu Empire, Emperor Wen. "This is the Longwu Guard token. Take it," Emperor Wen said, still not turning around. Report for duty tomorrow. He seemed to be meditating, lost in some deep, spiritual trance. A strange rhythm flowed through his body. For a split second, I saw it. A golden dragon, 60 feet long, shimmering over him before vanishing. It looked ghostly, like something that hadn't fully manifested in the world yet. Was that a chi dragon? Maybe the timing wasn't right, or perhaps the empire wasn't strong enough yet. Or maybe it was something personal to the emperor himself. While I was lost in thought, Li Wenjong hit the floor with a loud thud. "I thank your majesty for this honor," he said, his voice trembling with excitement. "I will not fail you." "You may leave," the emperor said, waving a hand like an immortal looking down from the clouds. Li Wenjong stood up. As he passed me, he gave me an encouraging look, as if telling me not to be nervous. Then he was gone. I was alone in the room with Emperor One. Incense smoke curled through the air. The room was so quiet I could hear my own breathing. I waited patiently. I didn't speak first. "Sit," the emperor said after a long silence. "Thank you, your majesty." I immediately knelt to show my gratitude before finding a seat nearby. "Your personality, it isn't like the Marquis of Anong at all," he remarked. He still hadn't turned around, yet he spoke as if he could see every move I made. "I was separated from my father when I was young," I replied respectfully. "I don't have many memories of him, and we rarely exchange letters. I don't truly know what kind of man he is. But your majesty's presence is as heavy as a mountain and as divine as a god. You are majestic, yet for some reason, I feel a sense of closeness. It makes me less nervous and a bit bolder." It was a daring thing to say. The emperor fell silent. I could sense his thoughts shifting. "I heard the Marquis has ignored you all these years," the emperor said, his voice dropping into a cold, emotionless tone. "He even had another son out east. Do you resent him?" My body shook slightly. I let my face transform. First, I let a spark of anger flash in my eyes. Then I covered it with a cloud of sadness. I forced my lips to tremble before letting my voice crack. "Your Majesty, I do have resentment." The emperor's voice turned sharp, like a freezing wind over a lake. "You know the Great Wu has been ruled by the principle of filial piety for 800 years. He is your father. How can a son harbor resentment?" I threw myself onto the floor, my forehead hitting the wood with a dull thud. My voice was firm. Great Wu is ruled by piety, but the order is clear: ruler before subject, father before son. The emperor is the father of the nation. Since your majesty asked, how could I dare to lie to you? Suddenly, a golden light erupted from the emperor's eyes. A crushing pressure rolled over me like a tidal wave. It felt like a giant beast was waking up from a 1,000-year sleep. My heart raced. The emperor was a cultivator, and his level was terrifying. This pressure was beyond the mortal realm. He had to be a peak expert of the second or even first rank. I wondered how the third prince could possibly kill a man this powerful in 5 years. Even against an army, a man like this should be able to walk away unscathed. Unless, during the coup, someone even stronger stepped in. I kept my face sincere, playing my role to perfection. A ruler is a ruler, a subject is a subject, a father is a father, and a son is a son, the emperor repeated. If only there were more people like you in my empire who understood this order. It would save me a lot of trouble. He finally turned around. His eyes were like burning torches as he studied me. "Lift your head. Let me look at you." I looked up. I noticed he had stopped using the formal we and was referring to himself more naturally. "You have a good face," he said with a nod of approval. "You are a fit match for my daughter, Yaoguang." He looked young for his age, full of energy like the rising sun. "To speak such words at your age, you must have read many books in the Marquis' estate. Your knowledge surpasses many of the great scholars in court." The emperor often acted like a monk or a priest, but he was incredibly sharp. He saw the political value in my words immediately. It was the ultimate tool for a ruler, a philosophy that demanded absolute submission to the crown. He clearly loved it. "Did someone teach you to say that?" he asked. "No, your majesty. It is simply what I believe." "Good, good," he laughed. It was a rare sound. In the corners of the hall, the maids and eunuchs looked terrified. They had served him for years and had never seen him show this much emotion, not even when meeting with his cabinet. "Do you know why I called you here today?" he asked, his tone shifting. "I do not, your majesty." I heard you solved the case of the stolen military maps and captured the spies in the capital. Normally, that would earn you the rank of commandant. However, I don't plan on giving you that position. Do you have any resentment about that? None at all, I said earnestly. Thunder and rain are both gifts from the heavens. I believe your majesty has a deeper purpose for withholding the rank. I trust your judgment completely. The emperor smiled. Thunder and rain are both gifts. If only every official in my court had your level of awareness. My words seemed to strike a chord deep within Emperor Wendy. The way he looked at me changed completely. I had started as a mere pawn he'd placed on the board to pass the time. But now, I was providing him with one surprise after another. He told me that if I had spent my life studying instead of practicing martial arts, I would have had the potential to become the prime minister. His voice was calm, but the words echoed through the hall, making the maids and eunuchs behind the pillars pale with shock. Coming from anyone else, it would have been flattery. Coming from the emperor, it was a terrifying weight. I didn't miss a beat. I fell to my knees, my voice ringing with conviction. I told him that if he needed a sword for the country, I would be his sharpest blade. I promised him I wouldn't hesitate to die on the battlefield, my body wrapped in horsehide, if it meant serving his will. It was a masterclass in acting. I leaned into the role so hard I almost started believing my own lies. The emperor murmured my words back to himself, savoring the tragedy and loyalty in them. He sighed, saying it was a waste for someone with my mind to be a soldier. Then, his tone sharpened. He told me he had a real use for me. He decided that staying in the Imperial Guard was beneath my talents. He wanted to send me to the Lantern Bearers. The Lantern Bearers. The Secret Service. The Emperor's eyes were like burning coals, searching my face for any sign of hesitation. He wanted to see if I was truly loyal to him or still tied to my father, the Marquis of Anong. I feigned confusion, then quickly shifted to excitement. I told him that wherever he sent me, I would go with my whole heart. I acted like a hot-blooded youth desperate to prove himself. He was satisfied. He informed me that there was a vacancy for a division chief in the 9th Division of the Lantern Bearers. He wanted me to take the post. I hesitated, playing the part of the humble servant. A division chief was a 4th-rank official. I was currently only a 7th-rank lieutenant. Jumping 3 ranks like that was unheard of. It broke every rule in the book. The emperor didn't care. He told me that since he was the one sending me, no one would dare to object. But there was a catch. He wasn't just giving me a promotion. He was giving me a mission. I flushed red, my voice rising with feigned passion. I told him I would climb mountains of swords or jump into seas of fire to complete it. If there was an Oscar for ancient political dramas, I would have won it right then and there. The hall grew quiet, the flickering candlelight casting long, ghostly shadows against the walls. The emperor leaned forward, his presence pressing down on me. He told me he didn't need me to die just yet. My task was to enter the Lantern Bearers and help the new commander, Ma Song, root out the rot. He wanted the spies from the Imperial City Guard and the censorate exposed and eliminated. I looked up at him, my voice steady. I asked if that was all. He laughed softly, a sound that didn't reach his eyes. He admitted there was one more thing. He wanted me to find the high-level mole who had allowed the maps to be stolen in the first place. The Lantern Bearers had been compromised, and the betrayal went deep. I gave him my word. I promised to find the truth within 3 months. The emperor raised an eyebrow, his gaze cutting through me like a knife. He warned me that there was no room for jokes in front of the crown. I didn't flinch. I repeated the vow. He flicked his wrist, and a white gold medallion floated toward me. He told me to report for duty the next day and gave me permission to take a few men from the Imperial Guard with me. With a wave of his hand, I was dismissed. I left the palace and climbed into the carriage where my uncle, Li Wenjong, was waiting. We sat in silence for a moment as the wheels began to turn. I broke the silence first, asking if he wanted to know what the emperor said. Li Wenjong kept his eyes closed, acting indifferent. He said that if the emperor wanted him to know, he wouldn't have made him leave the room. I leaned in and dropped the bombshell. I told him the emperor had appointed me as the chief of the 9th Division. His eyes snapped open. For a long second, he just stared at me, his breath hitching. He knew what this meant. The former head of the Lantern Bearers, Liu Li, had fallen after 20 years of absolute power. The agency was in chaos. By sending me there, The emperor was throwing me into a bloody whirlpool. Li Wenzhong sighed, his voice full of weariness. He talked about how Lu Li had become too powerful, how he had built a private kingdom within the lantern bearers until people feared him more than the emperor. His downfall wasn't just about the maps, it was inevitable. I looked out the window at the passing city. I knew he was right. Lu Li's failure was just the spark when he needed to burn the whole thing down. My uncle looked at me deeply, realizing I understood the situation better than he expected. He warned me that serving the emperor was like living with a tiger. One day you're the favorite, and the next, you're the prey. Lu Li, Ma Song, and even me. We were all just figures caught in a storm of power. I leaned my head against the carriage wall, staring out at the passing streets. I felt like I was trying to peer through the illusions of this world to see where destiny was leading me. I looked at Li Wenzhong. I didn't expect this cautious, traditional general to pour his heart out to me. He was about to become the great general of the Dragon Guard, one of the emperor's most trusted inner circle. Didn't he fear I'd tell the emperor what he just said? A small smile played on my lips. I told him that even though we hadn't known each other long, my judgment of people was usually sharp. I saw no reverence in his eyes, not when he looked at me, and not when he spoke of the emperor. I told him straight out that I wasn't as loyal as I appeared, and neither was he. We were the same kind of person. Li Wenzhong's gaze remained steady. He told me he saw great potential in me. He said that if I didn't make any major mistakes, I might be the one to break the centuries-old rule that prevented imperial relatives from holding real power. He even joked that he might have to rely on me one day, calling this conversation an early investment. He raised his teacup, gestured toward me, and drained it in one go. I stayed silent for a long time before returning the gesture. I told him there was an old saying about great wisdom appearing like stupidity. People said the court officials were the smartest men in the world, but I told him that if he had chosen the path of a scholar instead of a soldier, he would have outshone them all. It seemed a waste for him to be in the military. He laughed and shook his head. He said he didn't dare claim to have great wisdom, just a bit of experience in survival. He described the capital as a deep pool filled with dragons and snakes. Between the emperor and the clouds, the soaring nobles, the thuggish henchmen, the seemingly blunt soldiers, and the cunning politicians, everyone was brilliant. In a place like that, you had to walk as if you were on thin ice. He sighed, his eyes falling on me again. He told me that out of everyone in the younger generation, I was the smartest he had ever seen. I quickly cut him off, telling him we should stop praising each other. The carriage rolled on, and we both fell into our own thoughts. Suddenly, the silence broke. Li Wenzhong asked me a heavy question. He asked if I would protect his family if he ever fell from power. I looked at him, my heart feeling heavy. He looked so calm, yet there was a deep sadness beneath it. I remembered the history books, how the emperor viewed his generals as mere tools, and how the founding fathers had to endure and hide their true intentions just to survive. I asked him why he was being so pessimistic. He asked me if I knew how many great generals of the Dragon Guard there had been in the last 50 years. The answer was 8. In the last 20 years alone, there had been 5. I went silent. That meant the average lifespan of his new job was only 4 years. It was a high-risk position. He told me the emperor was becoming harder to read, his suspicions growing stronger every day. The best outcome any general had seen in decades was retirement. The rest had their homes seized and families ruined. There was a killing intent in his calm voice. He understood the risks. I nodded solemnly, not saying another word. The wind picked up outside, making the carriage bells chime sharply. I realized Li Wenzhong wasn't just betting on me. He was betting on the house of Anong behind me. He knew 4 years wasn't enough time for me to control the court, but it was enough time for my family to act. By revealing his weaknesses to me, he was offering a pledge of alliance. As I was thinking, the carriage jerked to a halt. An old servant outside whispered that a carriage belonging to the third prince was blocking the road. Li Wenzhong frowned. His predecessor had fallen because he got too close to the crown prince. Now, the third prince was approaching him. It was a dangerous signal. He ordered the driver to give way, but the road was wide enough for 6 carriages. The other side was clearly looking for him. A luxury carriage pulled up alongside us and stopped. A handsome young man stuck his head out. It was the third prince. He smiled, congratulating Li Wenjong on his promotion and inviting him to a nearby restaurant to celebrate. Li Wenjong couldn't avoid him now. He opened the curtain and coldly declined, claiming he had urgent business at home. He told the prince he would send an official invitation later if he held a banquet. He was trying to keep his distance. Everyone knew the prince and the crown prince were at each other's throats. If he wanted to keep his new job, he had to belong only to the emperor. The third prince laughed it off, calling him too cautious. He claimed the emperor was broad-minded and wouldn't be suspicious of a public meeting. Li Wenjong shook his head again, insisting he had things to do. The prince wouldn't let it go, jokingly asking if one of the general's concubines was about to give birth. Li Wenjong's face twitched, but he kept his composure. He told the prince that his family line had been thin lately, so his wife had arranged a matchmaking session for him today to pick out new concubines. He promised the prince a drink at the celebration next year when the babies arrived. I sat there listening, my expression turning strange. Li Wenjong had just reached a new level of shamelessness. The third prince was completely speechless. I wanted to see how Li Wenjong would handle the pressure, but I didn't expect him to be such a natural liar. He was actually better at talking nonsense than the prince. The third prince's eyes shifted. He leaned forward, peering past Li Wenjong into the carriage until his gaze landed on me. A look of recognition crossed his face. I didn't expect to run into an old acquaintance, he said. Young Master Xia Chun of the Xia family greets your highness, I said, cupping my hands. I didn't bother getting out of the carriage. You're my second sister's future husband, the prince said, waving his hand with feigned warmth. We're family. There's no need for such formality. General Li here is a bit timid. He's so afraid of gossip that he won't even grab a drink with me. Why don't you and I go for a few cups instead? I smiled back, matching his enthusiasm. You're right. We are family. There's no need to be polite at all. Your Highness can just call me brother-in-law. I'll keep calling you Your Highness, though. We'll each use the titles we like. Anything else would feel too distant. I even reached my hand out of the window, looking like I wanted to shake his hand. The third prince's mouth twitched. Between Li Wenjong and me, neither of us was playing by the rules today. I was being incredibly thick-skinned. He was 20 years old, and I was only 17. How was he supposed to call a teenager brother-in-law? Technically, by rank and marriage, I really was his brother-in-law. I could almost hear him cursing his father, the emperor, in his head for putting him in this awkward position. He stared at my face, my young, handsome face, and I could tell he was annoyed. Not only was I taking advantage of him, but I was also better looking. He forced a stiff, frozen smile onto his face. Brother-in-law, he managed to squeeze out. Your Highness, I replied, beaming. This trip to the palace was turning out to be very productive. I had just gained a cheap brother-in-law. Of course, I knew this little brother had massive ambitions. In the future, he would be ruthless enough to launch a coup and kill his own family. He was a dangerous man. We were on Jingda Street, surrounded by shops and vendors. A crowd had gathered to watch the two carriages, one flashy and grand, the other ancient and refined. People whispered, recognizing the prince's carriage and wondering who was important enough to make him stop in the middle of the road. If I'm not mistaken, that's General Li's carriage, someone muttered. The one from the military map case. He's about to become a major power in the court. The air felt heavy with hidden agendas. Li Wenjong looked grim. He knew he'd been played. Regardless of what happened next, the emperor and the crown prince would be suspicious of him now. He hadn't even started his new job, and he was already on thin ice. Your Highness, I said, breaking the silence. I really should get home. Unlike the general, I don't have concubines waiting to give birth or new ones to interview. I am completely loyal to your sister. You can rest easy on that. Let's catch up another time. I didn't wait for an answer. I laughed, cupped my hands, and closed the curtain. Our carriage started moving, leaving the third prince standing alone in the middle of the street. Inside the prince's carriage, a pretty maid in yellow clothes huffed in anger. That Li Wenjong and Xia Chun are so arrogant. They don't respect you at all. The third prince sat back, his expression unreadable. One is the emperor's new man, and the other is the heir of the Xia family. By status, he really is my brother-in-law. I'm not the crown prince yet. Why would they fear me? But they were so rude, she complained. Especially that Xia Chun, acting like he's your superior. The prince lay back, resting his head in the maid's lap. I knew they wouldn't come to drinks with me. I only showed up to annoy them. Li Wenjong won't join my side, so I'll make sure my father and the crown prince don't trust him either. As for Xiachun, I actually do want to win him over. He closed his eyes as the maid massaged his temples. People call him a waste, but I saw him fight at the White Moon Tower. He's a tiger. Even my father wants to use him now. It's embarrassing to call a 17-year-old brother-in-law, but if it gets me the support of the Marquis of Anong, it's worth it. With that military power, being the crown prince won't even matter. He started talking more freely, his voice dropping. My father has been obsessed with immortality for 50 years. He only had us late in life. He doesn't care about me. He just uses me as a tool to keep the crown prince in check. He has no intention of ever giving me the throne. His voice was flat, but the sadness was there. The maid looked down at him, her eyes full of pity. She knew he was lonely. He needed someone to talk to, someone to hear his frustrations. He wants to use me as a whetstone for the crown prince, the prince whispered, his tone turning icy. Fine, I'll let him rub me against the blade. He thinks he's a god, that he can control everything. We'll see if he's really a god when I'm done. Back in our carriage, I toyed with a dagger, feeling amused. The third prince has fast ears. We just left the palace, and he was already waiting for us. Li Wenjong glanced at me. He seemed to be aiming for you more than me. He just wants the Marquis of Anong behind him, I said carelessly. Too bad for him. I'm just an unloved son in that house. My support doesn't mean much. The Marquis might not care about you, Li Wenjong said, his voice low, but your uncle Xia Qian certainly does. And he's the one actually running the family right now. I just smiled and didn't push the topic. Li Wenjong dropped me off at Wendao Street, right in front of the Marquis' estate. I have to report to the lantern bearers tomorrow, I said as I stepped out. What happens to my job with the Imperial Guard? Li Wenjong shook his head slowly. His Majesty didn't say anything specific about that. But since you're joining the lantern bearers, you won't have time for the Imperial Guard anyway. I wouldn't worry about it. I watched his carriage disappear into the night. I turned and looked at the gates of the Marquis' estate. The air felt heavy, thick with the scent of coming rain. I walked inside and headed straight for the inner courtyard. My uncle, Xia Qian, was waiting for me. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Beside him, my Aunt Chui Mingru paced back and forth, her face pale. They both stopped the moment they saw me. Chinner, you're finally back, Xia Qian said. His voice was tight, strained. The news of the imperial decree is already spreading through the capital like wildfire. Everyone is talking. I sat down and poured myself a cup of tea. I didn't care about the gossip. Let them talk. It doesn't change the fact that I'm now the future empress's husband. The decree is set in stone. Chui Mingru sighed, her eyes full of genuine fear. It's a dangerous position, Chinner. You're a target now. The crown prince and the third prince are already moving. They won't just sit by while you take that seat. I looked at my hands. The power of the 8th rank essence refining realm hummed under my skin, warm and steady. I wasn't the weakling they remembered. I was a wolf hiding in plain sight. I know, I said. My voice was calm, almost cold. But if they want to use me as a shield, they'll find out I'm not a tool. I'm the one holding the blade this time. Xia Qian nodded slowly. He seemed to sense the change in my spirit. He reached into his robe and pulled out a small, ornate jade box. This belonged to your mother. She told me to give it to you when you were ready. I think that time has come. I took the box. It felt freezing to the touch. I opened it and found a simple jade pendant carved in the shape of a dragon. It glowed with a faint, pulsing light that matched my heartbeat. What is it? I asked, looking up at him. A key, Xia Qian whispered. To a place your father doesn't know about. A place where you can truly grow strong enough to survive what's coming. I gripped the pendant tight. The political storms were gathering over the capital. The city was a nest of vipers, and I was right in the center. But I was ready to burn it all down to forge my own destiny.